When did they say His Grace the Grand Duke would arrive? It seems he was delayed due to the fire at the theater on Central Avenue. What about His Highness the Prince? He is waiting in the VIP room. You there, move faster. We must ensure there is nothing they can fault us for. Outside, a grand carriage clatters across the courtyard, signaling the arrival of the esteemed guests. Inside the carriage, a man peers out through a slight gap in the gold-patterned curtains, his gaze dark and contemplative. Your Grace, we have arrived at His Highness the Prince's detached palace. The heavy, ornate doors of the palace creak open, letting in a brilliant, blinding light as the grand visitors prepare to enter. With slow, deliberate steps, a figure walks down the polished stairs, the sound of his boots echoing throughout the grand, silent hall. His Grace, Grand Duke Vasilente, is entering. I greet His Grace, the Grand Duke. I am the 6th Prince's nanny. Refreshments have been prepared in the rear garden. If you would please wait a moment. No. Right now. I will take the prince. Where is Prince Xion right now? He is in the VIP room. I will escort you. Please forgive our discourtesy in not coming out to greet you. His Highness was born with a frail constitution. With tense, quiet anticipation, the Grand Duke and his assistant follow the nanny down the vast, empty corridor of the palace. The Grand Duke remains completely silent, his expression unreadable and cold as they approach their destination. They arrive at the end of the long hallway, stopping before a pair of tall, heavily decorated double doors. The nanny reaches out and slowly turns the golden doorknob, unlocking the door to the VIP room. With a soft groan, the heavy wooden doors swing open, revealing a glimpse of the bright room inside. The nanny steps inside, leading the Grand Duke and his aide into the room where the young prince awaits. A pair of small, neat shoes steps forward onto the plush red carpet. It is an honor to meet you, Your Grace. The Grand Duke's aide flinches in surprise, his eyes widening in shock as he looks at the young boy. Wait a moment, this person is... We will immediately prepare to depart. Suddenly, the room is filled with a sharp, terrifying tension as a sword is drawn, its cold blade gleaming in front of the startled child. Your Grace! The nanny gasps in horror as the Grand Duke points his unsheathed sword directly at the young prince's neck, holding the blade steady and unyielding. Why are you doing this all of a sudden? Deceived you? The imperial family has, as promised, offered His Highness promise to give the prince as a hostage. Have you forgotten about the border war between Vasilente and the imperial family? On the condition of ending the war, the imperial family promised to give Vasilente one of the princes with purple eyes. The young boy stares at the cold blade with wide, trembling eyes, swallowing hard in sheer terror. It seems you think little of Vasilente. You're telling me this little kid is supposed to be 8? I'm a proper 8-year-old now, and besides, I might be small now, but Imperial Father and Imperial Mother are both tall, so I too will be Your Highness. The nanny looks on in sheer desperation, her face pale and trembling with fear for the young prince's life. The young prince flinches, staring in shock as the cold truth of the situation begins to set in. Imperial Mother is also tall. Even among the nobles, Her Majesty the Empress is noticeably petite. But those eyes are definitely the purple eyes that symbolize the Herta imperial family. Did they hastily find an illegitimate child of a similar age? What was that stain on the hallway wall? I don't know what you were referring to. We were just changing the picture frames to suit the palace's aesthetic, so the wall is temporarily bare. Even if it's temporarily bare, wasn't there a portrait hanging there that you didn't want me to see? For example, a portrait of the real Prince Xion Herta's face. You probably thought simply removing the portrait would be enough since he's never made a public appearance. But I've seen the prince's face in private before. It seems we are done talking. I have nothing against you, but the imperial family broke our agreement. The crime for daring to impersonate a member of the royal family is paid with your life. The agreement was not broken. The Grand Duke and his aide look on with grim, tense expressions as the truth hangs in the balance. Look! The nanny grips her dress tightly in terror as she tries to protect the boy. They are clearly purple eyes. The nanny desperately points out the child's royal features as a cold sword gleams right in front of him. The child's bright, shimmering purple eyes widen in sheer terror at the sharp blade held near his neck. The Grand Duke gazes down at the child, his golden eyes filled with deep calculation and coldness. What kind of nonsense is this? What Vasilente demanded was, of course, the purple-eyed Prince Xion Herta. Who do you think you're playing word games with? A hand in a clean white glove grips the ornate hilt of the sword, ready to strike at any moment. With a soft metallic slide, the Grand Duke begins to lower his weapon and step back. Enough! The Grand Duke speaks in a cold, authoritative tone, commanding absolute silence. The young boy trembles in silence, staring at the gleaming metal of the sword blade, reflecting his own terrified purple eye. "We will depart immediately. Hurry up and get ready." The Grand Duke turns away with a sweeping motion of his cape, leaving the nanny and the boy behind in the VIP room. "Your Grace!" The aide hurriedly follows behind the Grand Duke as they stride down the polished marble corridor of the palace. "I will track down the whereabouts of the real Prince Xion Herda. That child is definitely an illegitimate child, not the prince. But its clear imperial blood flows in his veins, even if it's only half. You saw those purple eyes. But that child is too young." "Too young?" The Grand Duke suddenly stops in his tracks, causing his aide to halt behind him in surprise. "Is there a right age to die?" The Grand Duke asks with a dark, contemplative gaze that sends a shiver down the aide's spine. "If you understand, then hurry and get ready to return to the Grand Duchy." The Grand Duke's orders echo through the quiet, sunlit room. "You did well, Your Highness. You did so well. You must act exactly like this when you arrive at the Grand Duchy." The nanny holds the boy's shoulders, desperate to ensure his survival. "Above all, no matter what anyone says, you must not forget your name, Your Highness." "Don't worry, nanny. Now, what is Your Highness's name?" The young boy stands trembling under the heavy weight of his destiny, his bright purple eyes shining in the dim light as his nanny looks on with a pale, anxious face. "Yes, that's right. You are Xion Herda. You must never forget it." "Right, I am Xion Herda, the sixth prince of the Herda Empire, the hostage sent to end the conflict between the imperial family and the Grand Duchy. And soon I will die." The young boy realizes the grim fate that awaits him as a royal hostage in a foreign land. "Look over there." A dark, mysterious voice whispers in the shadows of his mind. "That pillar, they say it was first built 130 years ago. It's really old and huge, right? Wow. But..." Flames begin to consume the magnificent structure, turning the memory into a blazing nightmare. "Yes, it's burning." A hand points toward the devouring fire as the intense heat and smoke rise. "The silk tapestries and even the silver cup bestowed by Her Majesty." The fire mercilessly turns priceless treasures into ash. "Now look!" The voice guides the child's attention back to a terrifying sight amidst the smoke. "Me too. Everything is burning." The shadowy figure of a child stands with outstretched arms amidst the blazing flames. "It's all burning, including me. But why aren't you burning?" A single desperate eye stares through the heat and smoke. "Why aren't you burning, Prince?" The screaming silhouette cries out in agony and resentment from the depths of the flames. "Your Highness." The young prince snaps out of his terrifying reverie, his purple eyes blinking as he returns to reality. The carriage has just crossed into the Vassalante Grand Duchy. The boy sits quietly inside the moving carriage, staring at the vast landscape outside. He peers out the window, his expression solemn as he contemplates his uncertain future in a strange new land. "I am currently riding in a carriage heading for the Grand Duke's castle. The journey continues under a bright, sunny sky." The grand carriage procession winds its way through a vast, barren canyon under the open sky. "Please, drink." A wooden cup filled with a dark, mysterious liquid is offered to the young prince by a gloved hand. "So bitter! It's coffee." The young boy grimaces in disgust at the strong, unfamiliar taste. "Since you were sleeping for so long." "Ah, thank you." The boy grumbles to himself, thinking about how nice it is to be given bitter coffee on an empty stomach. Suddenly, the carriage jolts violently with a loud thud, startling both the prince and his companion. "Did we stop? What is it?" The nanny peers out the window in confusion, trying to see what has caused them to halt. "What is going on?" "Before we reach the castle, His Grace wishes to see the prince for a moment." "Understood. Then I will also." He said he would like to meet with the prince alone. The nanny's plan to accompany him is quickly cut short. Only the prince is allowed to step out. The young boy's heart sinks as he realizes he must face the Grand Duke by himself. "Alone, meaning?" The prince breaks into a cold sweat, his breath catching in his throat at the thought of being isolated. "Really? Just the two of us?" If he was going to leave all the servants behind, he could at least walk a bit slower. The young prince struggles to keep up with the tall Grand Duke climbing the castle stairs. "A moment ago, the rest of you wait here." "Yes, sir." The Grand Duke had commanded his retinue to halt, leaving only the young boy to accompany him. You had better not get any foolish ideas. The young prince flinches as a chilling warning cuts through the quiet air. Even if you run, you will be caught in no time. The Grand Duke casts a sharp, intimidating glance back at the child. The young prince stays silent, his bright purple eyes reflecting the brilliant sunset as he steels himself for whatever comes next. I will not run. Stopping his steps on the stone stairs, the young prince declares firmly that he has no intention of fleeing. Standing further up the stairs, the Grand Duke turns back to look down at the young boy who is struggling to keep up with him. I do not mean to be presumptuous, but I already know about the secret pact between the imperial family and the Grand Ducal family. The prince looks up boldly, revealing his knowledge of the agreement. The imperial family does not care what happens to the life of the prince sent as a hostage. The secret pact exposes the harsh reality that the boy's life has been completely abandoned by his own royal family. Despite knowing the grim and hopeless fate that awaits him, the young prince puts on a calm, gentle smile. The Grand Duke looks down at the child in absolute silence, his golden eyes filled with deep calculation. Did he understand? He understood, right? I told him I won't run, so he should stop trying to intimidate me. The prince breaks into a cold sweat, desperately hoping his compliance will put an end to the terrifying pressure. The young prince's bright purple eyes widen in surprise as the Grand Duke moves to show him something. Look ahead. What do you mean by that? The Grand Duke commands the boy to gaze out from the castle walls, leaving him utterly confused. Ah! The young prince gasps in sheer amazement as he looks out over the parapet. This land! He is met with the sight of a vast, desolate wasteland stretching to the horizon under a blazing sunset. It was not a wasteland like this before. According to ancient records, a long river flowed along the fortress walls, and an endless grassland stretched beside it. The Grand Duke begins to recount the lost glory of their territory. Over 300 years ago, before the first emperor of the empire cursed this land, an illustration depicts a powerful wizard emperor calling down lightning to place a devastating curse on the flourishing kingdom. Do you see those stakes driven into the ground? Yes. The Grand Duke points to a row of wooden stakes driven into the barren earth, and the prince nods in confirmation. They mark the area of the wasteland, which expands every year. Starting from the center of the Grand Duchy, it has expanded for centuries and has now reached near the empire's border. The prince stares in somber silence as the terrifying scale of the curse is explained to him. Is it revenge? No. The first emperor died 300 years ago. The prince asks if this is a grudge match, but the Grand Duke calmly explains that the emperor is long dead. And if it were for revenge, we wouldn't have bothered to bring a clueless baby. What I'm trying to do is not some petty revenge. What we need is land to live on for the future of the Grand Duchy. The prince sweat drops at being called a clueless baby while the Duke explains their true necessity. You are the sacrifice to break this land's curse. The Grand Duke delivers a chilling declaration under the glowing sunset. The prince's life is needed to save the dying duchy. It doesn't matter which member of the Herda imperial family we have. Unfortunately for you, you were selected. The young boy looks up as the realization sets in. Ah, so that's why. Even so, your life is your own. Even though it is not a fair trade, you will be giving up your life, so it is only right to offer some kind of compensation. The Grand Duke promises some form of reward in exchange for the boy's ultimate sacrifice. They said Grand Duke Vasilante was a warmongering savage. The prince contemplates the terrifying reputation of the man standing before him. Does a savage usually say such upright things? Who would even know if you take that measly compensation or not? You're just a hostage anyway, and your life is forfeit. The boy questions whether a true savage would act so honorably to a doomed hostage. I cannot grant a plea to spare your life, but I am sorry. The Grand Duke pauses, offering a sincere and unexpected apology to the young prince. Both to you, your grace, and to all the people of this Grand Duchy. What? The prince is left stunned by the profound gravity of the Duke's apology. It would be nice if my death could solve this. The young prince smiles softly, hoping his sacrifice will truly bring peace to the people of the Grand Duchy. Standing on the high castle balcony under the golden light of the setting sun, the towering Duke and the petite prince stand together in quiet contemplation. Where should I put this box? That contains clothes, so there. As evening falls, the castle servants begin unpacking the carriage under the watchful, weary eyes of the prince. Hello, your highness. The young prince is suddenly startled by a bright, energetic greeting from behind him. Please call me Hilda. A beautiful maid with short black hair and shimmering green eyes curtsies gracefully. "I will guide you to where you will be staying. Please follow me." With a bright, cheerful smile, Hilda offers to lead the prince to his quarters. "Your Highness will be staying in the annex. The main castle is only for the direct descendants of the Vasilente Grand Ducal family." She explains the rules of the castle as they begin their walk. "The annex's fireplace is blocked, but since it is spring now, it should be perfectly fine to stay there." Hilda leads the prince through the elegant, moonlit stone hallways of the castle. It does not rain or snow in the Grand Duchy, which makes it incredibly hot in the summer and just as cold in the winter. She describes the extreme climate of the cursed land as they walk side by side. "I see." The young prince responds quietly, feeling a strong sense of déjà vu about ending up alone with a stranger once again. A moment ago, Hilda is shown casually dumping all her lobby cleaning responsibilities onto another startled maid so she could guide the prince herself. The prince covers his face as a sudden brilliant light streams through the towering glass windows. "This is the Astrid Forest." Hilda points out the window toward a breathtaking view of a lush, vibrant green forest. "It is the only forest in this land, created by the Grand Duchess 5 years ago. That is why the forest was named after the Grand Duchess." She explains the mystical origins of the beautiful woodland. "Back then, His Grace wasn't as indifferent as he is now. You might not be able to imagine it, but His Grace courted the Grand Duchess with incredible passion. He was a very passionate man." Hilda shares a romantic portrait of the Grand Duke kissing his wife's hand. "To the point where he kidnapped the Grand Duchess, eloped with her, and held the wedding the very next day?" The prince sweat drops in disbelief. This is really unexpected, that the cold Duke could have been such a passionate kidnapper. "But the current Grand Duke has gone a bit mad." The prince recalls the rumors of the Duke's current cold and unhinged state. The young prince turns around in surprise as the maid continues her story. The Grand Duchess was a wizard born with immense talent, to the point where she could conjure a forest like this in an instant, even in the center of this barren land. Hilda speaks of the sleeping Duchess's unmatched magical abilities. The Grand Duchess put all her effort into saving this land with that ability, but because she exhausted too much mana in the process, she has been sleeping from 5 years ago until now. Hilda explains the tragic cost of creating the forest. In the Western Tower, an illustration shows the beautiful Grand Duchess lying in a deep, perpetual slumber, surrounded by pure white roses and chains. After that incident, the Grand Duke went completely mad. Hilda smiles gently, delivering a grim description of her master's mental decline. "Even though I want to use delicate words in front of our young prince, there is no other way to describe His Grace's condition." The prince looks at her with mounting unease, thinking, "This person? Why on earth is she telling me this?" The boy becomes highly suspicious of the maid's overly candid and personal revelations. "What does she want from me? A hostage who is about to die? I have a bad feeling about this." The prince realizes that being confidant to such dangerous secrets bodes ill for his survival. The young prince casts a nervous sidelong glance, steeling himself for whatever hidden motives the maid might harbor. Just when is Nanny coming back? The prince wonders in silent worry, but he is quickly reassured. "You do not need to worry about your nanny. The lobby is quite large." "I needed some time to talk with you like this, Your Highness," Hilda says in a serious tone, her sharp green eyes fixed on the young boy. "Your Highness, don't you wish to live?" Hilda's question cuts through the quiet hallway, catching the young prince completely off guard. "Pardon?" The young prince is stunned, his purple eyes widening in sheer disbelief at the maid's sudden and direct question. "I'm no match for the Grand Duchess, but I am a mage myself. I could at least help you escape," Hilda offers. "No, wait," the prince stammers, stepping back in confusion. "Aren't you part of the Grand Ducal house, Hilda? What happens to the curse if the sacrifice disappears?" the prince asks, pointing out the gravity of fleeing. "Since you've already heard about the curse, this should be easier to explain. I don't believe a sacrifice will lift it. Your sacrifice would be in vain, and I serve the Grand Duchess personally, not the Grand Ducal house," Hilda states firmly. Hilda fondly remembers the Grand Duchess, a beautiful woman with long flowing purple hair adorned with elegant hair ornaments, standing with her back turned in a radiant white dress. "The Grand Duchess I know would never sacrifice a child's life just to save the land." "His Grace the Grand Duke doesn't seem to share that view," the prince notes, sweating slightly as he questions the Duke's true intentions. "If you tell me you want to live, I can get you safely out of the Grand Duchy," Hilda continues, her voice low as she stands before the window. Aren't you afraid of death? Hilda asks directly. No, the boy starts, hesitant to answer. A heavy silence falls between them in the moonlit corridor, punctuated only by the echo of Hilda's footsteps as she stands before him. Then what's holding you back? Hilda asks, looking down at the young prince whose profile is illuminated by the window's light. It's almost like you... Hilda trails off, staring intensely into the prince's mysterious violet eyes as if searching for something hidden. Suddenly startled by an approaching presence, Hilda flinches as a wave of realization sweeps over her. Then, please. Hilda quickly turns around and begins to walk away, leaving her offer hanging in the quiet air. Ah. The prince turns his head in surprise as he hears footfalls echoing from further down the castle hallway. There you are, Your Highness, the nanny says warmly, appearing from around the corner just as Hilda departs. As Hilda walks down the dark, vaulted corridor, she glances back and wonders, what did that woman say to you? The nanny walks up to the young prince and places a gentle, reassuring hand on his shoulder in the quiet corridor. The young prince looks down with a complicated and heavy expression, his mind racing with the secrets he has just learned. I guess spending all day in the carriage wore me out. I'm going inside now. You should rest too, Nanny, the prince murmurs tiredly before heading to his room. Entering his chamber, the young prince closes the heavy door behind him with a soft click, plunging himself into quiet solitude. Sigh. That head maid, the prince sighs deeply, leaning against the door as his mind drifts back to his conversation with Hilda. She didn't seem like a bad person, but the prince recalls Hilda's serious green eyes and her unexpected concern for his life. Hilda's chilling and persistent questions continue to echo in his mind. If you tell me you want to live, I can get you safely out of the Grand Duchy. Aren't you afraid of death? Collapsing backward onto the soft bed, the exhausted prince lets out a tired breath as he collapses under the weight of his thoughts. Then what's holding you back? The maid's question repeats like a haunting melody in the quiet moonlit room. Staring blankly at the ceiling, the prince closes his eyes as the true answer forms in his mind. Because I'm already marked for death, the prince thinks, his mind drifting back to the grim circumstances of his past. Xion Herda, 6th Prince of the Herda Empire, or at least that's the role I was hired to play. The prince lies on the bed, reflecting on his fabricated identity. I am a first-rate actor, the young child smiles confidently, completely aware of the grand facade they have been maintaining. I'm 10 years old, not 8. I'm posing as a boy, but I'm actually a girl, and naturally I'm not even an illegitimate child of the imperial family, just a commoner born with exceptionally rare violet eyes, and the youngest member of the Borva troupe. An arsonist, a murderer, and a death row inmate, Letitia Borva. Her dark past as a criminal is laid bare, showing her original name and her childhood sitting curled up and miserable in a back alley. Before that, I didn't even have a name to call my own. A penniless orphan with no one in the world, a beggar. Letitia recalls her miserable days of absolute poverty. I'm starving. Clad in rags, the starving child huddles in the dirt, her stomach rumbling painfully as she watches people pass by. In the bustling town market, 2 cheerful citizens walk past, one carrying a bag full of freshly baked baguettes. Ah, damn it, watch where you're going. Dashing out of the shadows, the desperate child collides with the shopper and quickly snatches the bag of bread. Huh? Hey, wait! The citizen stands completely frozen in shock, staring in disbelief at his empty hands as he realizes he has been robbed. You little street rat! That street rat stole my bread! The baker screams in a rage, pointing down the street as the young girl flees with the heavy paper bag. Get back here! I haven't eaten in 2 days! My legs are giving out! Letitia thinks desperately as her small, bruised feet struggle to maintain their pace. But I still have to run! Move! If he catches me, he'll take the bread back and beat me half to death! Letitia squeezes her eyes shut, pushing past her physical limits. If I can just round that corner, the little girl thinks. But as she turns, she collides headfirst into a tall, impeccably dressed gentleman. Ah! Oh no! Letitia falls backward onto the cobblestones, looking up in absolute terror at the imposing figure she has just run into. The gentleman's trousers! Letitia's eyes widen in horror as she notices a prominent, dirty smudge of charcoal left on the gentleman's clean, light-colored pants. Got you, you little street rat! A rough hand suddenly grabs Letitia by the hair from behind, pulling her back with immense force. Now I'll teach you a lesson, the baker snarls, raising a fist to strike the trembling child. But a calm voice suddenly interrupts him. Young man, I'll pay for the bread. Why don't you leave the child to me? The elegant gentleman offers, holding out a shiny silver coin to the furious baker. Oh, well, the baker stammered, his eyes instantly locking onto the glittering silver coins in the gentleman's hand as his anger melted away. The baker eagerly bows to the elegant gentleman, saying, "By all means, sir, please teach this brat a proper lesson yourself." Clutching their new silver coins, the baker and his companion walk away in high spirits, saying, "What a windfall! Load all this money! Let's go buy the meat we couldn't afford earlier." Meanwhile, the young Letitia watches them from behind, trembling with anxiety. Standing before the looming gentleman in his expensive attire, Letitia is paralyzed with fear, her heart pounding frantically as she wonders what to do. Staring at his luxurious clothes and his casual handling of silver, Letitia realizes this gentleman must be an incredibly important person, recalling a horrifying rumor of a girl named Molly who was whipped by a foul-tempered noble. Squeezing her eyes shut, Letitia trembles in terror, fearing that he might tear her back open like Mally's. But instead of anger, the gentleman's calm voice breaks through her panic as he tells her she has great potential. Stunned by his unexpected kindness, the young girl opens her purple eyes wide and looks up at the towering gentleman in disbelief. The gentle noble extends his hand and offers the hopeless child a life-changing choice, asking, "Would you like to come home with me?" From that fateful day on, the young girl's life took a completely different path as she reached out to accept the kind gentleman's hand. Letitia soon learned that the wonderful gentleman who saved her was Lord Borva, and that he ran a highly successful theater troupe. Located on the capital's main avenue, the Borva troupe was a trendsetter and one of the city's biggest attractions, constantly drawing endless, enthusiastic crowds. Lord Borva readily provided Letitia with warm food and clean clothes, and soon asked her if she would like to try her hand at acting. Though she felt incredibly shy and hesitated at the thought of reciting lines and performing in front of a massive crowd, she ultimately accepted. On stage, a handsome actor delivers a highly passionate performance, dramatically crying out, "All I did was work hard at my job. Why must I be sent to hell?" The actor desperately begs for salvation, crying out that surely an angel will descend to see how unjust his suffering is, while the audience watches with rapt attention. As a bright golden light begins to illuminate the stage, the audience gasps in awe, anticipating the divine appearance of a savior. To the absolute delight and thunderous applause of the crowd, Letitia beautifully descends from the ceiling as a glowing angel to deliver her lines. Basking in the success of the play, Letitia fondly believed that Lord Borva's exceptional eye for talent had recognized her innate acting abilities from the very first moment. In reality, Letitia humorously realized that by potential, Lord Borva was simply referring to her incredibly beautiful face, leaving her sweat-dropping in disbelief. At the end of the spectacular performance, Letitia stands proudly in the center of the stage, taking a bow with the rest of the troupe before a packed theater. However, her beautiful dream of stage lights and stardom was short-lived, shattering abruptly like cracked glass as she was dragged back to a cruel reality. In the bustling streets of the capital, a newspaper boy runs through the crowd yelling, "Extra, read all about it," as citizens scramble to read the shocking news. The sensational headlines shocked the city, branding Letitia as the devil in a child's guise, following a massive fire that destroyed the theater and killed all the actors, including Lord Borva. The public's adoration instantly twists into vicious accusations, with angry voices declaring her a demon-possessed witch who bewitched everyone with her innocent face. As furious mobs demand that she be burned alive, Letitia is locked away behind the heavy, cold iron bars of a dark prison cell. Huddled miserably in her cell, the child dubbed the Witch of Borva refuses to eat or speak, prompting her captor to ask if she has already resigned herself to death. A handsome blonde nobleman in a royal cape stands outside her bars, offering a cold proposal. If you're doomed to die anyway, why not put your life to better use? Looking closely at Letitia's sharp purple eyes, the nobleman offers her a dangerous new role to play, promising her a chance at survival if she performs it perfectly. Looking around her spacious, dim bedroom, Letitia reflects that no matter how she ended up in this situation, once she accepts a role, she must carry it out. Standing by the window in her prince's attire, Letitia steels her resolve, declaring that this grand castle is her new stage and she is the actor who must play her part. Looking determinedly ahead, Letitia tells herself that it is unthinkable for a professional actor to leave the stage before their role is over. With a firm commitment to her performance, she resolves to give absolutely everything to the grand role she has been given. Framed by beautiful white flowers in the moonlit palace, the young girl swears to maintain her secret identity and see this dangerous performance through until the very end. 3 days have already passed since Letitia began her quiet stay under her false identity at the Grand Duke's detached palace. As she walks through the beautiful, glowing blue gardens at night, her mind drifts from her princely duties to a much more desperate matter. Exhausted and sweat-dropping in misery, Letitia clutches her stomach and silently screams that she is incredibly hungry. Because the land of the Grand Duchy becomes increasingly arid near its center, fresh vegetables are a rare luxury, more precious than meat, forcing the kitchen to use them very sparingly. Letitia recalls her strict, stern nanny pointing a finger at her and demanding, "Do you understand?" The nanny explains that because the real prince is 8 years old while Letitia is 10, she must restrict her physical growth to match his age. Since the Grand Duke is scheduled to arrive at the detached palace in a week, the nanny apologizes but insists on strictly restricting Letitia's diet, leaving her sweat-dropping in despair. Letitia recalls how she painstakingly starved herself to look younger, but because it made her look far too frail, the prince's father instantly suspected she was a fake, nearly getting her head cut off by a sword. Clutching her throbbing stomach in pained agony, Letitia laments that her prolonged fasting, combined with drinking coffee to suppress her appetite, completely ruined her digestion. To make matters worse, the Grand Duke's castle only provided raw ingredients, requiring her small entourage to prepare all of their meals themselves. Letitia's tiny, makeshift entourage consists of only her nanny, a maid named Ina, 3 coachmen, and a strict lecturer, with none of them besides the nanny knowing her true identity. Ina the maid happily presents a large, steaming bowl of dark, heavy meat stew, smiling proudly as she serves her young master. Because Ina is not a professional chef and had no idea Letitia had been starving, the heavy, greasy stew immediately upsets Letitia's stomach, causing her to throw up while Ina screams in horror. Ina bows repeatedly in a panicked, tearful apology for her terrible cooking, while Letitia sweat drops and tries to reassure her that she is fine. Walking through the dark woods, Letitia's stomach growls painfully as she laments that she has survived only on tiny portions of gruel and salt water for 3 days, unable to sleep from the hunger. Although a formal luncheon is scheduled for this afternoon, Letitia looks around with wide violet eyes, realizing that waiting until then is absolutely impossible. Suddenly, she spots a cluster of beautiful, glowing white acacia flowers hanging from a nearby tree branch. Remembering that acacia flowers bloom in the spring, Letitia happily looks at them, recalling how sweet their nectar tastes, and preparing to pluck and eat them to ease her hunger. Letitia plucks a cluster of acacia flowers, thinking that although they won't fill her stomach, their sweet nectar should help soothe her hunger a little. Keeping her movements cautious and quiet, Letitia gently places a sweet acacia flower petal into her mouth. Tasting the delicious sweet nectar, she mentally cries out in absolute delight. A warm glow washes over Letitia as her purple eyes light up with bliss, completely savoring the sweet taste after days of starvation. She reflects on how incredibly long it has been since she last put anything edible in her mouth, finding the simple flower petal amazingly sweet and delicious. Suddenly, a sharp, cold voice interrupts her peaceful moment, demanding, "Are you eating weeds right now?" Startled, Letitia looks over to see a mysterious figure standing in the dimly lit garden pathway with a large white wolf beside him. Gasping in surprise, Letitia drops the flower petal from her hand as she freezes in fear. Sweat dropping in pure panic, Letitia listens as the silver-haired boy mockingly asks, "I guess the Empire raises its princes like beggars?" Letitia gazes at the boy, noting his striking gold eyes and his hair color, which is a perfect match to the Grand Duke's. She carefully observes his youthful appearance, trying to deduce his identity. Noting his luxurious noble attire and his authority to roam the detached palace's annex freely at such a late hour, Letitia realizes who he is. Standing tall in the garden beside his white wolf, the boy is revealed to be Chamuka Vassalente, the young lord of the Vassalente Grand Duchy. Staring at him in disbelief, Letitia nervously laments her terrible luck, realizing that of all the people she could have run into, it had to be him. Looking at the happy, panting white wolf, Letitia wonders what kind of creature is next to him, recalling that she had never heard anything from Hilda about a pet dog. Chamuka stares down at Letitia with a menacing, cold glare, murmuring to himself that he is greeting the young lord in the dead of night, whom he dismisses as mere hurta trash. With a mocking tone, Chamuka looks at Letitia and asks, "If you're that hungry, should I give you this?" Holding out a single piece of red jerky with a smug grin, Chamuka tells her, "It's dog treats, though." Looking at his happy white wolf, Chamuka sneers at Letitia, declaring that because he can't tell if she is a dog or a person based on her current appearance, it should be perfectly fine. Standing opposite Letitia in the moonlit garden, Chamuka delivers a cruel ultimatum. "So if you crawl over on all fours like a dog, I'll give it to you." Absolutely stunned by his shocking insolence, Letitia's sweat drops in disbelief, wondering if he is actively trying to pick a fight with her. She reflects that because the relationship between the Grand Duchy and the imperial family is notoriously bad, she expected him to be hostile, but telling a prince to crawl on all fours is an extreme insult. Letitia realizes Chamuka expects her to turn red with rage or cry out of humiliation, knowing no royal would ever degrade themselves for a piece of dog jerky. Looking at him with sharp, calculating purple eyes, Letitia ponders her next move and asks herself what she is going to do about his provocation. Recalling her grim past, she reflects that because people assumed she was destined to die soon anyway, everyone felt entitled to treat her poorly. Remembering the painful memories of others gossiping and poking around her life without ever knowing what she was truly thinking, Letitia resolves not to let Chamuka get the better of her. Looking at Chamuka's smug face, Letitia decides to flip the script, thinking, "Should I tease him a little?" Gently placing her hand on the ground, Letitia reflects that Chamuka has no idea she isn't a real prince, and that she has a long history of digging through trash cans out of hunger from her days begging on the streets. Crawling on all fours without a shred of hesitation, Letitia looks up at the young lord and casually barks, "Woof." Chamuka's eyes widen in sheer horror and utter disbelief, a cold sweat breaking out on his face as he witnesses the prince's shocking behavior. Crawling closer as Chamuka stammers in absolute panic, Letitia happily barks, "Woof woof," while silently noting that dogs aren't supposed to speak anyway. Recoiling in panic, Chamuka exclaims that this is ridiculous and accuses Herta of not having a single shred of pride or shame, only to gasp in shock when Letitia leans forward and bites the jerky right out of his hand. Biting onto the jerky directly from Chamuka's hand, Letitia happily chews on it, noting that it tastes wonderfully salty. His entire face flushing a bright, embarrassed red, Chamuka stammers in absolute outrage and disbelief as Letitia continues to happily chew the jerky in front of him. Thoroughly enjoying the food, Letitia happily chews the savory jerky, thinking that it is absolutely delicious. Letitia licks her lips and leans in to bite just a little more of the jerky, prompting Chamuka to hastily yank his hand back in shock. Losing her balance as Chamuka pulls away, Letitia falls backward onto the cobblestones with a dramatic cry. Sitting dazed on the ground, Letitia watches as Chamuka and his wolf turn and run away in a complete panic. Under the bright full moon, Chamuka and his white wolf flee down the garden path at top speed, thoroughly freaked out by the prince's bizarre behavior. Chamuka and his wolf run away as fast as their legs can carry them, leaving Letitia far behind in the garden. Letitia lets out a long, exhausted sigh of relief, glad that her dramatic performance worked. Looking up at the beautiful moonlit sky, Letitia happily reflects that she successfully acquired a piece of jerky, reminding herself to eat it very slowly this time so she doesn't upset her stomach. Meanwhile, Chamuka and his white wolf sprint past the high stone walls of the castle, desperate to escape the garden. Gasping for breath as he finally slows down, Chamuka is suddenly startled when a voice calls out, "Young lord." A worried guard runs up to Chamuka, frantically asking where he went so late at night, only to gasp in shock when Chamuka bluntly replies that he went to the forest. The guard sighs in disbelief, questioning why Chamuka went into the forest and why he keeps taking Lord Tan outside the tower, mentally complaining that the young lord is incredibly weird. When the guard asks why he has been acting so strangely lately and warns that his father will scold him severely if he finds out, Chamuka coldly replies, "Then tell him." Chamuka looks back with a sharp, resentful expression, asking if his father truly doesn't realize that locking Lord Tan up next to his mother won't magically turn him back into a human. The guard sweat drops, looking deeply troubled and unable to find the words to respond to the young lord's bitter question. Suddenly, a stern, elegant older noble standing in the palace doorway calls out to him, cutting through the silence with a single word, "Chamuka." Standing in the doorway of the dimly lit palace, the Grand Duke of Vasilente turns his cold yellow eyes toward Chamuka and asks, "Did you go into the forest?" Looking away to avoid direct eye contact, Chamuka nervously replies that he only went as far as the outskirts, mentioning that he saw new people have moved into the forest keeper's villa. Chimuka coldly remarks that the newcomers are hostages from the Empire, complaining that they should have asked for food supplies instead of a useless, expensive herda with purple eyes. Profiled in the shadows, the Grand Duke warns that the curse on this land will be broken soon and Astrid will awaken, sternly ordering Chimuka to stop trying to take his younger brother out of the tower. Chimuka looks back with a sharp, resentful expression, declaring with deep bitterness, "I don't have a brother," before walking away. Chimuka stands alone in the dark garden, looking down with a deeply troubled and frustrated expression as his father's words weigh heavily on him. Clenching his fist tightly in silent fury, Chimuka wonders if his father honestly believes that killing one scrawny little prince will actually solve everything. Staring at his father standing in the distant hallway, Chimuka tells him to just face reality already. Chimuka delivers a final, cutting remark, stating that it is not like his father even has any feelings left for their mother anyway, leaving the Grand Duke standing in silent contemplation. Turning away without another word, the Grand Duke coldly commands Chimuka to take Tan and go inside.
Chimuka grits his teeth, his yellow eyes burning with unresolved anger as he watches his father walk away.
To comfort his upset master, the loyal white wolf Tan gently licks Chimuka's hand. Standing quietly in the soft light, Tan wags his tail and looks up at Chimuka with bright blue eyes. Feeling his anger soften, Chimuka reaches down to gently pat Tan's head. Under the soft yellow flowers, Chimuka gazes at his beloved pet and lets out a gentle, quiet smile. The scene shifts to lunchtime, showcasing a magnificent chandelier glowing brightly inside the castle's dining hall. An incredibly heavy and tense atmosphere fills the room as the Grand Duke, Chimuka, and Letitia sit at the long dining table for their formal luncheon. The Grand Duke elegantly cuts his food, the scraping of his silverware on the plate echoing loudly in the absolute silence. Letitia sits rigidly in her seat, sweating profusely in extreme discomfort under the silent gazes of the Grand Duke and Chimuka. Her hand trembling violently with anxiety, Letitia tightly grips her spoon as she tries to handle the pressure. Sweat dropping in pure panic, Letitia screams in her mind about how unbelievably uncomfortable the luncheon is. Wondering how long they have been sitting there, 10 or 20 minutes, Letitia is astounded that neither of them has spoken a single word, literally just focusing on eating. Letitia takes a deep breath, trying her absolute best to ignore her hosts and focus entirely on the food. Looking at the massive array of meat pie, grilled chicken, roast duck, steak, and meat stew, Letitia sweat drops and nervously wonders if they are trying to fatten her up before they eat her. Letitia looks across at Chimuka, worrying that forcing herself to eat this heavy food will only upset her weak stomach and make her throw up again. Putting on a polite, shaky smile, Letitia speaks up, claiming that she is not feeling very well. Hearing her complain, Chimuka glares at her with a sharp, annoyed expression, recalling how she hungrily ate dog treats right out of his hand the night before. The Grand Duke sighs and says he shouldn't have called for her, prompting Letitia to politely thank him for hosting such a magnificent feast. When the Grand Duke tells her to go back and rest if she is unwell, Letitia looks up in surprise, wondering if he is actually being considerate. Surrounded by beautiful white flowers, Letitia reflects that looking at him now, the Grand Duke seems surprisingly kind. She remembers how he took her to the castle walls the other day to talk about repaying a debt or whatever, finding his actions unexpectedly gentle. Just as Letitia happily smiles and prepares to take her leave, a sudden thunderous crash violently shatters the peace. The large double wooden doors of the dining hall are blown wide open, catching everyone completely off guard. Panicked voices scream out that they can't do this and that the luncheon is still ongoing, desperately calling out to Lord Guyan. A powerful hand clad in a dark armored gauntlet violently grips the edge of the doorframe. A heavy leather boot steps firmly onto the dining hall floor as a menacing voice speaks. Guyan Vasilente, the crazed former Grand Duke of the Vasilente house, bursts into the room and loudly declares that the sacrifice has finally arrived. With a wild, fanatic glow in his yellow eyes, Guyan completely ignores the Grand Duke's sharp command to stop. Terrified maids run after Guyan, frantically shouting for him to stop as he charges into the dining hall. Chimuka rushes forward, screaming out to his grandfather in complete panic and disbelief. Letitia's purple eyes widen in utter shock as she suddenly finds herself being hoisted up into the air. Without a moment's hesitation, Guyan slings Letitia over his shoulder and runs off at full speed. Chimuka stares in absolute horror and anger, his face pale as he witnesses his grandfather's bizarre actions. Clinging to Gayen's back, Letitia desperately screams that she is going to tell grandmother everything, making Gayen pause for a split second before continuing to run. Gayen sprints out of the castle gates with Letitia slung over his shoulder, ignoring her loud protests. Chimuka chases after them at top speed, panting heavily and completely freaked out. Gayen stands before Letitia in a vast, dry wasteland under a bright blue sky, leaving her to fearfully wonder if she is going to die there. Looking up with sharp purple eyes, Letitia notes that given Chimuka's terrified reaction, offering a sacrifice this way was definitely not agreed upon. She deduces that since Chimuka called him grandfather, this wild, older noble must be the former Grand Duke of the Vassalente house. Staring at Gayen's imposing figure, Letitia realizes that since this is the will of the former Grand Duke himself, the Grand Duchy will have to take responsibility if anything goes wrong. Letitia calmly accepts her fate, reflecting that she is merely fulfilling her role as the prince's double and a sacrifice, though she certainly didn't expect to die without any formal procedure. However, before she can dwell on it, a firm hand grips her shoulder. Gayen looms over Letitia, his glowing yellow eyes fixed on her as he coldly declares that he must first verify if she is indeed the rightful sacrifice. Taken completely off guard by his words, Letitia looks up in confusion and stammers, "Pardon?" As Letitia repeats the words, rightful sacrifice, in disbelief, Gayen looks down at her with a stern expression, explaining that there is no point in offering the wrong thing. Holding up a dried, withered leaf in his gloved hand, Gayen asks Letitia if she sees what he is holding, explaining that he brought this cursed leaf from the forest of Astrid. Gayen tells Letitia that if she is indeed the rightful sacrifice, she should be able to break the curse on the leaf, leaving Letitia to think in pure panic that there is absolutely no way she can do this. Feeling her heart sink, Letitia frantically panics in her mind that nobody ever mentioned a verification process, terrified that he is about to find out she is a fake. Kanayan looks forward with fanatic intensity, anticipating the miracle she is supposedly going to bring to this cursed land. Without another word, Gayen releases the dry, cursed leaf, letting it flutter down toward her. Letitia watches in sheer terror as the dead leaf slowly falls, knowing that her life is on the line. Letitia bitterly reflects that it isn't because she has lingering attachments to life. Even if she were the real prince, she would die here anyway, and as a fake, she would be executed for deceiving the Grand Duke's family. She acknowledges that her fate was sealed the moment she boarded the carriage bound for the Grand Duchy, but she is terrified of what will happen if they discover her lie. Letitia looks up in quiet despair, wondering what will become of the contract and the promise that was made to her. She recalls the flashback of the cold, mysterious man who promised that if she played her part properly, he would give her a brand new role. The memory continues as the man promises to spare her family's lives, while the young Letitia stands silently, her purple eyes filled with sorrow. Clad in dirty, tattered clothes and bound by heavy iron chains, the young Letitia gasps in fear as she is locked away in a dark dungeon. Behind the thick iron bars of her prison cell, Letitia watches as the guards frantically warn the emperor to be careful, only for the ruler to coldly dismiss them. Gripping the cold iron bars, Letitia desperately asks the emperor if there are any survivors left from her family. Looking down at her with a shadowed, indifferent expression, the emperor replies that most are dead, but the few who survived have sustained such severe injuries that they will soon die without immediate treatment. Extending his hand toward the young girl, the emperor offers a cruel deal. If she accepts his terms, he will have her family treated immediately. The emperor's chilling question echoes in the darkness, demanding to know if she will accept the deal. Looking back at him with silent resentment, Letitia bitterly thinks that he is a devil who already knows she was not the one who burned her family to death. She reasons that if she truly were the wicked witch who tried to burn her own family alive, he would never have dared to hold their lives hostage. She knows it was simply more convenient for him to make her the culprit, since he had no one else to blame. Clutching the bars of her cell, she bitterly accepts that she simply happened to have the purple eyes he needed, yet she is still willing to go to any length to protect her loved ones. She fondly remembers her cherished theater troupe holding a bright bouquet of sunflowers as they happily congratulated her on her debut, praising her as the youngest and most amazing actor on stage. Reclaiming that determination, Letitia places her hand over the emperor's inner memory and firmly agrees to do it. Looking through the iron bars with fierce resolve, Letitia tells herself that she will play that role to the very end, as it was the only choice she had. She reminds herself that her only remaining hope was that by sacrificing her own single life, her beloved family could live. Letitia tightly closes her eyes, dreading that if she fails and dies here, she will lose her life without saving them either. With a soft click, the dry, cursed leaf gently lands right on top of Letitia's golden hair. Suddenly, a magnificent, brilliant golden light erupts, completely surrounding Letitia and Guyan in a dazzling display of magic. To everyone's absolute astonishment, the withered brown leaf is instantly restored, turning into a vibrant, glowing green leaf floating in the air. Staring at the magically restored leaf, Letitia's purple eyes widen in complete shock and disbelief, utterly speechless. Staring at the miracle before his eyes, Guyan lets out a breathless, triumphant laugh. Letitia gazes up at the sparkling green leaf, her mind completely blank as she tries to comprehend what just happened. Sweat dripping down her face, Letitia trembles in pure disbelief, wondering how such a miracle was even possible. Clenching his fist tightly in absolute conviction, Guyan declares that there is no longer any reason to hesitate, promising that he will never forget her sacrifice. With a wild, dangerous glint in his eyes, Guyan swings his blade down toward Letitia to complete the ritual. Letitia shrinks back in terror and closes her eyes, bracing herself for the fatal strike as the wind whips violently around her. Clang! Just before the blade can reach her, a sudden, powerful clash of swords shatters the air as someone rushes in to block the strike. The Grand Duke firmly holds his sword against Guyan's blade, pleading with his father to stop because recklessly killing won't solve anything, prompting a frustrated grunt from Guyan. Leaping backward to create distance, Guyan grumbles that the Grand Duke is awfully quick on his feet, to which his son calmly retorts, asking who else his son would take after. Glaring with intense yellow eyes, Guyan stubbornly insists that he cannot wait any longer to break the curse. Looking at his father with a stern, unwavering gaze, the Grand Duke sharply questions what they will do if they fail. Guyan gestures to the barren wasteland, warning that the situation will only get worse the longer they delay. He highlights the urgency of the situation, stating that the lake's surface area is shrinking by the day. Keeping a protective hand over Letitia, the Grand Duke explains that he is looking for the water vein to secure enough water to ensure they don't fail, insisting that they cannot perform the ritual right now. Guyan demands to know what they will do if the skeletal prince runs away in the meantime, while Letitia clutches her brooch in terror, still reeling in shock. Trembling under the heavy atmosphere, Letitia looks on with a pale face, completely overwhelmed by the tense confrontation. Letitia's mind races in complete panic as she wonders how the curse was broken, briefly questioning if she really is the Emperor's hidden child before quickly dismissing the thought as far too optimistic. Letitia rejects the idea of being the Emperor's true bloodline, thinking it is absolutely ridiculous to believe that everything happened by mere chance, when she is suddenly startled by a gentle touch and a voice telling her that she is trembling. A gentle hand cradles the blonde child's head as a soothing voice comforts her, calling her a poor thing and telling her not to worry. Ferric looks determined and gold-eyed, reflecting that if anything goes wrong, Astrid will die. The former Grand Duke looks stern and unyielding, coldly asking why that should even matter. Astrid is pictured walking beautifully in the forest as the former Grand Duke compares her single life to the lives of tens of millions living in the Grand Duchy's territory, questioning if they are even comparable. Ferric's expression remains completely cold as he declares that he doesn't care if Astrid dies, as long as the forest remains after her death. Hearing this, the blonde child looks up with a shadowed expression and quietly tells Ferric to kill her. A bright, sudden burst of magical light envelops the scene as Letitia faces Ferric and the former Grand Duke. Letitia looks at them with a subtle, knowing smile, leaving the former Grand Duke completely bewildered by the sudden shift in her mood. Smiling mysteriously, Letitia raises her finger to her chin and a bright, sparkling aura. Letitia beams with a beautiful, radiant smile that leaves Ferric completely stunned and speechless. Suddenly, Letitia loses her balance and begins to sway, causing Ferric to look on with wide, startled eyes. Before she can hit the ground, Ferric quickly catches the unconscious Letitia in his arms as the former Grand Duke watches in surprise. The former Grand Duke looks down in utter disbelief, gasping in shock as the situation unfolds. Holding the unconscious child closely, Ferric looks down at her, wondering what on earth is happening. Letitia lies peaceful and still, surrounded by beautiful golden floral patterns. Letitia's hand gently rests on a marble tabletop as she slowly wakes up, realizing where she is. Looking around in confusion, she recognizes the elegant dressing room of her beloved theater troupe. Wondering if she is trapped in a dream or a lucid dream, Letitia is startled as a beautiful woman parts the curtain and steps forward. Letitia's purple eyes widen in surprise as the elegant woman warmly greets her, calling her little one. Under a beautiful archway of white roses and shimmering light, a stunning woman with long black hair and a violet dress smiles down at her. The gorgeous, blue-eyed woman smiles with immense warmth and grace, surrounded by glowing sparkles. She stands elegantly amidst the white roses, radiating a magical and serene presence. The beautiful woman is revealed to be Astrid Vasselinde, the mistress of the Vasselinde Grand Duchy. Letitia stares at her in absolute shock and awe, unable to find her voice. Astrid steps forward gracefully, her light purple slippers decorated with white roses clicking against the floor. Without warning, Astrid enthusiastically scoops Letitia up into a tight hug, squealing over how cute she is, leaving Letitia completely flabbergasted. Astrid gushes that Letitia is incredibly handsome, almost as much as her own son, and laments that she would have taken her as a disciple if she were in her right mind. Noting that the room looks like a theater troupe's waiting room, Astrid praises Letitia's acting before casually adding that she didn't expect the imperial family to send a real prince. Astrid looks down at Letitia in her arms with a curious expression, questioning her title of Your Highness. Close-up on Astrid's face as her lips curve into a gentle, playful smile. Astrid gently sets Letitia on her lap and notes how quick on the uptake the child is, before casually mentioning that she just decided to get a divorce and is no longer Her Highness. Surrounded by beautiful purple roses, Astrid warmly tells Letitia to simply call her Astrid. Close up on Astrid's face as she looks at Letitia with deep, warm blue eyes. Blushing deeply, Letitia can't help but think about how incredibly pretty Astrid is. When Letitia asks if this is a dream, Astrid explains that they're actually in Letitia's subconscious, which Astrid has slipped into for a brief moment. Astrid gently shakes her head and clarifies that she didn't restore the withered leaf earlier, confirming that it was indeed Letitia's own power that did it. Shocked by this revelation, Letitia asks if she really is part of the Hertha imperial family, only for Astrid to firmly deny it. Astrid points her finger up with a dramatic flourish, explaining that Letitia possesses a power far greater than just some Hertha royalty, which leaves Letitia hilariously sweating in disbelief. Pointing to the barren wasteland, Astrid explains that the land became desolate because of the first emperor's curse, and while Ferric knows this, he doesn't know what comes next. Astrid playfully taps Letitia's nose and reveals that at this point, not even a Hertha descendant's blood can break the curse. Holding Letitia on her lap, Astrid explains that she only specified that the sacrifice needed to have purple eyes, and Ferric simply assumes she meant a Hertha, completely forgetting that Hertha eyes are actually light purple. Letitia looks back at Astrid in quiet confusion, while Astrid offers a gentle, knowing smile. Astrid smiles apologetically and admits that she is indeed the one who brought Letitia to this place, causing Letitia to react in absolute shock. Astrid reflects that even she didn't expect Ferric to actually pull off such an impossible task, as Ferric kneels in deep despair beside her deathbed in a grand, sunlit room. Looking up at Astrid, Letitia wonders how Ferric was even able to find her. Astrid smiles warmly, her expression filled with gentle affection. Astrid tightly clasps Letitia's hands in her own, looking at her with deep warmth. Holding Letitia close within a beautiful, ornamental frame of purple flowers, Astrid proudly declares that Letitia is a mage, just like her. Close-up of Letitia's sparkling purple eye, wide with complete shock and absolute disbelief at the staggering revelation. Letitia asks in confusion, "A mage?" To which Astrid confirms, explaining that while Letitia hasn't fully awakened yet, she can definitely feel the energy, noting that it seems like it tried to awaken but couldn't quite get there. Astrid explains that mages usually awaken naturally when the time comes, but sometimes they awaken forcefully by clashing with an opposing element. She then notes that since Letitia has the energy of water, just like her, Astrid playfully suggests that Letitia try stepping into a fire to spark her awakening, leaving the child absolutely startled and sweating in sheer panic. Astrid reassuringly laughs and says that it's perfectly fine, because Letitia will never die from an opposing element. Astrid advises Letitia to head straight to the magic tower even if she doesn't awaken, boasting that her master is an exceptional person who will recognize Letitia's talent and take her in as a disciple, though she playfully adds that her master isn't quite as great as her. Hearing this, Letitia hesitantly calls out Astrid's name. Sitting on Astrid's lap in the dreamlike dressing room, Letitia quietly asks what will happen to this land if she ends up going to the magic tower. Letitia wonders if the magic tower will be able to break the curse, while Astrid looks down with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Astrid explains that when the magic tower takes a mage, they always pay a fitting price, revealing that in her own case, the price paid was 12 warehouses filled with gold and a river in the desert. Astrid guesses that Letitia's price will be even greater, explaining that if the Grand Duchy demands it, the magic tower will gladly create a lake and make it rain whenever they want. Letitia hesitantly asks if that means they won't be able to completely break the curse, which Astrid calmly confirms. Astrid gently tells Letitia that this isn't something she needs to worry about, as it's a problem the duchy must solve themselves. Meanwhile, Letitia tightly clenches her hands, remembering how the curse broke for a moment and the leaf came back to life when it touched her earlier. Letitia keeps thinking to herself, remembering Astrid's words about Ferric finding her despite the impossible condition, and wonders if what this land truly needed wasn't a Hertha descendant, but Letitia herself, asking Astrid if she is correct, which leaves Astrid staring back in stunned silence. Letitia looks at Astrid with an unwavering, serious expression, waiting for an honest answer. Astrid remains silent for a brief moment, her playful demeanor completely fading. Breaking the heavy silence, Astrid smiles gently and firmly answers, "No." Astrid clarifies that Letitia's theory is not true, while Letitia remembers a fundamental lesson from her theater days. When actors first receive a script, they're taught to control certain physical reactions to deliver a natural performance, such as a slightly quickening breath, frequent blinking, and constantly licking dry lips to hide their nervousness. This is because those physical tics are telltale signs of lying that break the audience's immersion. Recalling this, Letitia realizes Astrid is lying and asks if her own death actually has value. Astrid's blue eyes widen in complete shock as Letitia confronts her with a dark, knowing expression. As Letitia's consciousness begins to fade back into the dark, she weakly tries to hold on to the memory, thinking that Astrid had said something to her at the very end. In her fading memories, Astrid desperately calls out to her, pleading for her not to do it and warning her never to make that choice. Astrid frantically tells Letitia to keep her words in mind, but her voice drifts away as Letitia laments that she couldn't understand what Astrid meant. Letitia slowly blinks her eyes open, only to find the Grand Duke leaning over her bed, looking down at her with deep concern. Gasping in surprise, Letitia stammers in shock as she recognizes him, calling out, "Your Grace!" Letitia looks around in confusion, wondering where on earth she is. Letitia calls out to him in confusion as Ferric silently turns around and begins to walk away from her bedside. Letitia is left utterly bewildered as Ferric exits the room, shutting the heavy door behind him with a sharp thud. Left all alone in the massive, dimly lit bedroom, Letitia looks around in bewilderment, trying to figure out where in the world she is. Noticing that the windows are all covered with thick curtains, Letitia carefully fumbles her way over to them, murmuring that it is far too dark to see anything. Before Letitia can open the curtains, a hand suddenly slams against the fabric and grabs her wrist, causing her to flinch in fright. The young silver-haired prince sternly warns her not to open the curtains unless she wants to die by his father's hands right this instant. The young prince curtly orders her to follow him out, prompting Letitia to quickly and nervously agree. As the young prince walks ahead with a solemn face, Letitia stumbles behind him, making a loud clattering sound. Hearing the noise, the prince turns his head to find that Letitia has completely lost her footing and fallen onto the floor. Blushing furiously in deep embarrassment, Letitia looks up at him with wide, apologetic purple eyes. Scrambling back onto her feet, Letitia quickly apologizes, stammering that she simply lost her footing. Despite her attempts to act fine, Letitia's hand trembles uncontrollably against the floor, betraying her intense fear and exhaustion. Looking at her with cold, golden eyes, the young prince silently wonders what on earth his father was thinking when he decided to bring this weak child into the tower. The silver-haired prince lets out a weary sigh, clearly frustrated by the situation. Letitia stands completely frozen and tense as the young prince starts walking back towards her. Without warning, the prince throws a large white cloth completely over Letitia's head, causing her to let out a startled gasp. Completely covered in the white sheet, Letitia confusedly asks what is happening, to which the prince explains that she is not allowed to look around, instructing her to wrap herself up tightly. The prince crouches down low, preparing himself for the next move. To Letitia's utter amazement, the silver-haired prince tells her to get on his back, offering her a piggyback ride. The prince waits impatiently with a stern, solemn face, his intense yellow eyes fixed forward. Peeking out from beneath the white cloth, Letitia stares at him with wide, glittering purple eyes, deeply touched by his unexpected kindness. The silver-haired prince patiently keeps his back turned, waiting for her to climb on without saying another word. Wrapping her hands tightly around the cloth, Letitia looks at his back with a soft, grateful expression, ready to follow his lead. A close-up of a hand gently resting on the ornate fabric of Chimuka's shoulder. Chimuka carries Letitia on his back as he walks down a long staircase inside the tower. Letitia nervously starts a conversation, quietly saying, Chimuka's golden eye glances back slightly as he hears her voice. Letitia resting on his shoulder, saying, "Thank you, young lord, for helping me." Chimuka frowns slightly and replies, "Don't call me that," leaving Letitia to ask in confusion, "Pardon?" Chimuka continues carrying her down the stairs and introduces himself. "My name is Chimuka Vasilinte. Just call me by my name." Letitia responds, "Ah, yes," while secretly wondering, did he not hate me? Letitia reflects on how direct names are usually for close people, remembering how Chimuka used to pick fights for no reason and wondering if there was actually a purpose behind it. Chimuka suddenly calls out, "You," to which Letitia quickly answers, "Yes." Letitia hesitatingly asks, "Did he say when?" as a dark silhouette of a person appears on the wall. Chimuka explains that the Duke and his father have different views on the matter, so he doesn't really know yet. Letitia says she accepted her situation early on, believing her cooperation helps the young lord, and asks if lifting the curse with a sacrifice is also a good thing for him. Letitia flinches in surprise as the atmosphere shifts. Chimuka turns his head with a sharp, serious look and asks, "Do you believe that stupid nonsense too?" causing Letitia to mutter, "Pardon?" in confusion. Chimuka looks away and states, "And Hilda is more proficient in magic and curses than my father." Letitia quietly points out that the Duke could still be right, adding to herself, "And to be completely honest," close-up of Chimuka's golden eye narrowing in deep thought. Letitia's inner monologue continues. "The Duke and you, Chimuka, won't lose anything." Chimuka asks if she is scared at all since she is the one who is going to die, to which Letitia asks if he wanted her to be scared, prompting him to say her lack of fear isn't normal. Chimuka says it would be troublesome if a hostage got scared and ran away, but adds that the way she speaks sounds exactly... Chimuka finishes his sentence as he walks, "Like you just want to die like this." Letitia clutches Chimuka's sleeve tightly, her hand trembling slightly at his words. In a grand meeting room, an escort asks if the prince will really be all right alone, while the prince replies that after what happened, he would rather be alone in peace. A green-eyed guard named Hilda voices her concern about Lord Guyan coming back, but another voice reminds her that the prince said he is fine. The nanny firmly cuts in, saying any further persuasion would be excessive. Hilda retorts, "It seems you aren't worried about the prince's safety, nanny," to which the nanny calmly replies, "Of course I am worried." Hilda flinches as the nanny points out that there were escorts during the last luncheon, prompting a defensive, "Are you implying that you cannot trust us?" before a voice firmly calls out, "Hilda." Letitia looks on in quiet distress as Hilda and the nanny stand in tense opposition. Letitia politely speaks up to ease the tension, saying, "Thank you for your concern, but I'm really fine." With a gentle, warm smile, Letitia adds, "Please don't worry." Later that night, Letitia sits quietly in her room by the window, with only a single candle burning on her table. Staring out into the starry night, Letitia wonders to herself, "I wonder if Lord Astrid..." Letitia thinks about Astrid, wondering if he believed he couldn't bring himself to sacrifice a child. She muses that deep down, he couldn't help but worry about the family he left behind. In a flashback, the Grand White Magic Tower is shown as Chimuka explains, all descendants of the Vasilinte family are cursed to lose their emotions. Standing in the tower's courtyard, Letitia asks in shock, "A curse?" To which Chimuka confirms, "Yes." Letitia looks at him with wide, thoughtful eyes, saying, "But..." Letitia points out that she doesn't think Chimuka lacks emotions, but Chimuka explains that it's only because he is still young. Chimuka explains that the curse exerts a greater influence as time passes, and eventually, they lose all emotions. Chimuka adds that his grandfather and father have already lost theirs, prompting Letitia to ask why he is suddenly telling her all of this. Chimuka turns away, telling her not to expect sympathy from them, explaining that his family firmly believes the ritual will save the land, and even if it fails, they won't care. Chimuka coldly states that they will never feel sorry for her innocent sacrifice, so she must act smartly as he begins to walk away. Chimuka stops and places a firm hand on Letitia's shoulder, telling her, "Act smartly." Looking down at her, Chimuka adds, "If you don't want to die in vain." Back in the present, Letitia looks out her window at night, thinking to herself, it's nice of him to care. Letitia reflects that even though she has newly learned a few unexpected facts, her role hasn't changed in the slightest, both then and now. Looking up at the full moon, Letitia reflects that instead of dying for no reason as a hostage, she is now a sacrifice to save a drying land, realizing that this might actually be better. Letitia's monologue continues. What this land truly needed was a mage's life, as Chamuka grips a thick rope tightly under the moonlight. Chamuka scales the high tower wall using the rope, while Letitia concludes her thoughts, thinking, I've already heard and know the conditions for awakening. The window suddenly slides open as a man holding a rope climbs inside the dark chamber, startling the young prince who was sitting by the window under the starry night sky. Under the bright starlight, Lord Guyan stands tall outside the window, his cold yellow eyes staring intensely at the young child. The young prince looks up at the intimidating figure with a calm, serene smile, showing no fear. Opening the double doors, the prince greets his visitor warmly, saying, Welcome, Lord Guyan. Guyan steps firmly into the room, his long dark cape flowing behind him as the small prince welcomes him with a bright smile. Stunned by the warm reception, Guyan looks at him in disbelief, asking, you've been waiting? Yes, because you didn't quite achieve what you wanted last time, the young prince replies cheerfully. I thought you might come looking for me again. Narrowing his golden eyes, Guyan murmurs, To think you were waiting while knowing I'd come. I don't know what you're thinking, but... Guyan turns to walk away, saying, At least it sounds like you won't make a fuss. If you understand the situation, let's go immediately. But the prince stops him, pleading, Before that, there is one favor I would like to ask of you. Guyan halts and glances back coldly over his shoulder, asking, What is it? With an innocent and radiant smile against a flowery background, the young prince asks, Could you set me on fire? A tense, heavy silence falls over the grand room as the two characters stand frozen, staring at each other in disbelief. Outside, the vast castle stands quiet under the clear blue sky as Guyan reacts in sheer shock, uttering, What? Back in his study, Prince Ferric holds a blue feather quill and asks with a deeply troubled expression, What is father doing right now? The attendant sweats and stammers nervously, replying, Yes, well, Lord Guyan. In the hallways, the maids carry baskets of laundry while hurrying along, whispering in shock. What in the world happened? Another servant peeks from behind a column, sweat dropping and wondering, Am I seeing things? Rumors spread like wildfire as servants gossip. They say he's walking all around the Grand Duke's castle with His Highness the Prince on his shoulders. Perched high on Guyan's shoulder, the golden-haired prince smiles happily and beams with pure joy. Hearing this absurd report, Ferric rubs his temple and lets out a heavy, stressed sigh, muttering, Ferric asks, How many days has it been since father started carrying the prince around everywhere? The attendant replies, Today is the 4th day. Well, actually, that's caused a bit of a problem. The attendant explains, His Highness the Prince's nanny keeps begging us to return him, crying hysterically that the prince is too delicate and that she cannot sleep at night out of sheer worry. The attendant awkwardly tries to find a silver lining, reasoning, well, even so, it's much more reassuring that he's treating him well than not. At the very least, it means he's given up any thoughts of harming His Highness the Prince for now, doesn't it? During dinner, Guyan gently holds the prince and orders, This fabric is too rough for a child to wear. Have the prince's clothes remade in cotton. The attendant adds, Since he's skilled at taking care of children, I don't think there's anything else to worry about. A grim frown forms on Ferric's face as he darkly warns, You still don't know my father. Leaning forward with a piercing gaze, Ferric asks, Have you forgotten how my father ended up getting divorced? The narrative shifts to 5 years ago at the Vassalinte Grand Duke's castle. Flashback maids carry refreshments down the castle corridors, whispering, Lady Isana doesn't look well lately. You haven't heard? Heard what? They discuss the dark rumors. Her Grace, the Grand Duchess, hasn't been seen lately. They say something went wrong while she was giving birth to the second young master. One maid gasps, asking, Is that true? Yes, they say the baby didn't make it either, the maid confirms. That's why she suddenly disappeared. No one knows where she is. Poor Lady Isana. They lament, she cherished her Grace the Grand Duchess so much, noting that Isana was the mother of both the current Grand Duke and the former Grand Duchess. At the dinner table, Isana weeps bitterly into her handkerchief while Guyan sits completely silent and unresponsive next to her. Guyan coldly addresses his son, Ferric. Ferric answers, yes. With complete emotional detachment, Guyan demands, "It seems your mother wants a second grandson. Go find another woman and have a second child at once." Standing up in absolute fury, Asana screams, "Guyan, can you even call yourself human?" In a fit of explosive rage, Isana swings a silver tray and smashes it directly over Guyan's head with a loud crash. Ferric recalls, unable to hold back any longer, Mother struck Father with the silver tray. After that, she immediately left the estate and returned to her family home, declaring she refused to live another day with such a man, and the divorce papers arrived the next day. But did the divorce go smoothly? No, the narration continues. But Guyan absolutely refused to cooperate, shouting, "Divorce? I will never sign it with my own hand." That's right. Since he absolutely refused, Ferric explains, I locked him in the underground prison, and I signed in his place. Since he absolutely refused, Ferric explains, I locked him in the underground prison, and I signed in his place. Ferric walked away with the signed papers as Guyan shook the bars in a rage, shouting his name, while Ferric ignored him and stated, "The moment these documents are submitted, the two of you will officially be strangers." Ferric turns to his sweated attendant and asks, "So tell me, my father ignored the nanny, the maids, and the attendants, and is personally taking care of the prince himself for no apparent reason. Does that still put your mind at ease?" In the quiet hallway, a faint rustling sound is heard as something is dropped. A hand gently reaches down to pick up a small piece of red jerky from the stone floor. The young prince carefully drops the jerky into a small pouch, looking focused. The prince suddenly gasps and flinches, his large purple eyes widening in surprise as he is spotted. Startled, the young prince quickly turns around and runs down the corridor in a hurry. Watching from behind a pillar, the attendant asks in confusion, "Is it a hobby, picking up jerky off the floor?" Ferric looks on with intense suspicion, remembering his own words, "I told you not to pick things like that up." The prince runs straight into Lord Guyan, who stands tall with his arms crossed, causing the child to look up in surprise and say, "Ah, Lord Guyan." Lord Guyan looks on with a stern, cold expression, his golden eyes filled with an intense and unreadable focus. Walking away with the young prince, Guyan coldly instructs him, "I had something to check in the study. Come along now. I'll prepare your snacks separately, so throw that pouch away," while Prince Ferric and his attendant watch them from a distance. Watching them leave, Ferric's attendant remarks in surprise, "Things seem much friendlier than I expected," while Ferric remains silently watchful. A close-up reveals a small, beautifully wrapped chocolate treat resting on a pair of open hands against a warm, glittering pink background. Sitting in the parlor, Guyan strictly warns the child, "You don't eat things that have fallen on the floor." The prince defends himself, saying, "I wasn't going to eat it," prompting Guyan to ask, "Then why did you pick it up?" Glancing away thoughtfully, the young prince explains, "To return it to whoever dropped it." Or he looks toward the sleeping white wolf dog and finishes his thought, "Give it to Tan." Guyan asks, "Do you know who the jerky belongs to?" To which the prince cleverly responds, "I thought Lord Chamuka might have scattered it to Lord Tan. Since you brought Tan back at dawn, Lord Chamuka probably doesn't know about that yet." Pleased by the boy's quick wit, Guyan gently pats the prince's golden hair, saying, "I do like how perceptive you are." Guyan's gaze turns sharp and calculating once again as his golden eyes narrow in deep thought. Under the quiet, starry night, Guyan questions the boy, "You think you might be a mage, so you want to jump into a fire to find out?" To which the prince replies, "When I lost consciousness, Lady Astrid came to me in my dream and told me that." Hearing the name, Guyan mutters, "Astrid?" in surprise. He recalls the strange silhouette of light he witnessed before, thinking, it's hard to believe that's a lie. Guyan continues to reflect, realizing whatever was there at the time, it certainly wasn't the prince, before slamming his hand firmly on the table and concluding, "However." Guyan firmly states, "Even if what you're saying is true, I can't throw you into the fireplace right now. I can't risk turning such a valuable sacrifice into a pile of ashes." Hearing this, the prince calmly asks, "But whether you beat a sacrifice to death or burn it, you're still offering a sacrifice, aren't you?" Guyan explains, "No, there is a proper procedure for offering a sacrifice. Back then, I only meant to knock you unconscious. To break the curse, the sacrifice must be offered by drowning it in water." The prince sweats in disbelief, thinking, "Just knock me unconscious? So that's what that was?" Looking down with a soft sigh, the young prince murmurs, "I understand what you mean. If that's impossible, instead..." Looking at the child, Guyan decides, "We'll try another method." Gayan reaches down and takes the prince's hand, commanding, "Now hold out your hand," leaving the child utterly confused. The prince gently places his small hand on Tan's fluffy white head, prompting the wolf dog's ears to perk up in surprise. Tan wakes up and starts panting happily, barking woof, 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 as the prince and Gayan look on. Seeing the friendly reaction, Gayan notes, "It looks like Tan has taken a liking to you." Stepping back, Gayan tells the child, "I'll be watching from behind, so you two play together on your own," leaving the prince to ask nervously, "So all I have to do is play with Tan?" The young prince stands frozen and sweat drops, nervously whispering, Standing by the window, the prince glances back at Gayan, who watches silently with his hand on his waist. The prince gently greets the beast, saying, "Hi, Tan," while Gayan watches intently, murmuring, you." Looking warmly at the friendly wolf dog, the prince smiles and says, "Your eyes are really beautiful." Tan happily licks the prince's cheek, causing the young child to giggle and exclaim, "Whoa!" Tan eagerly climbs onto the sofa to play with the prince, panting happily as the child gently holds its face. Watching the interaction, Gayan's eyes suddenly widen in pure shock and realization as he notices something extraordinary. In a sudden panic, Gayan commands attack as a sudden flash of light startles the young prince. The narrator explains, a blue-eyed wolf dog that the Grand Duke suddenly began bringing around at some point. As Ferric walks through the corridors with the large white wolf dog, the narration continues, and when the servants called for him, they absolutely had to address him as Lord Tan. Highlighting Tan's elegant form, the narration notes, "Tan is special. His handsome, noble appearance and his rare wolf dog lineage certainly play a part in his uniqueness, but a glowing, crackling sphere of blue energy is shown as the narration reveals it is because of Tan's mana circuit." Showing Tan's beautiful white tail glowing with light, the narration adds, "Because he was awakened through acquired factors rather than being born with it." A depiction of Tan sensing invisible forces explains he can sense the scent of latent mana with his sharp animal senses. Back in the room, Gayan watches the prince play with Tan and gasps, thinking, "That's..." Looking at Tan's glowing, joyful eyes, Gayan realizes in utter disbelief, a mana reaction. A glowing sphere of celestial energy illustrates the magical principle. Mana is naturally drawn to mana that is greater and stronger than its own. Beautiful flows of purple and blue light swirl as the narration continues. Awakened beings in particular naturally feel an affinity toward those with powerful mana. The intense orb of magical light pulses with power as the narrative notes, since Tan's mana exceeds the average. A golden balance scale sways with a sharp metallic clinking sound. A beautiful dark-haired woman with brilliant blue eyes watches the golden scale as the text explains, "Even Astrid, who was called the genius of the century, failed to break the curse and fell into a slumber. If the prince's mana is weaker than Tan's, it would mean he has practically no value as a mage." Against a dark background of sketched golden roses, the narration asks, "But just maybe, what if the prince does have the aptitude?" Desperate to test his theory, Gayan shouts, "Tan, attack!" as the white wolf dog leaps forward with explosive speed. Tan lunges directly at the defenseless young prince, surrounded by a swirling aura of powerful blue mana. The prince gasps in terror as Tan's jaws snap shut, tearing tightly into the sleeve of his green shirt. Suddenly, the doors burst open as Prince Ferric rushes in, screaming, "Tan, stop!" and pulling the young prince away just in time. Holding the startled child protectively in his arms, Ferric pants heavily, sweat dripping down his face in sheer relief and anger. While Tan pants happily nearby, Ferric glares at his father with absolute fury and demands, "Father, have you lost your mind?" Prince Ferric glares furiously at his father Gayan, demanding, "Were you planning to kill the prince and using Tan to do it?" Gayan stands before Ferric with a cold, unreadable expression, secretly thinking to himself how close he was to confirming his suspicions before casually replying, "Of course not." Gayan continues to defend himself, explaining, "I merely wanted to check how well Tan listens to commands. I had no intention of letting him get hurt." Ferric angrily points out that the prince would have been severely injured if he hadn't arrived, but Gayan remains completely unfazed, claiming he would have saved the child himself. Disbelieving Gayan's excuses, the attendant raises his voice in frustration, yelling, "Don't talk nonsense! Weren't you just leaving the prince and Tan completely unchecked?" The furious shouting continues as they ask Gayan, "Were you planning to observe a corpse after he died?" Gayan snaps back in anger, yelling, "How dare you interject when you don't even know the context? leaving the sweated attendant to wonder what kind of bizarre conversation they are even having. Eric firmly steps in front of the startled young prince to shield him, declaring, "I will protect the prince from now on. If I leave him by your side, father, even 10 lives wouldn't be enough for the sacrifice." Gain reacts with absolute fury, shouting, "Do you think I'll allow that?" But Ferric coldly retorts, "Why do I need your permission?" Ferric looks down with an intense and unwavering gaze, reminding his father, "The current head of Vasilante is not you, father, but me." Summoning his authority, Ferric calls out, "Knights," as a group of fully armed soldiers immediately march into the room. As the knights surround Guyan, Ferric calmly states that it is a reasonable measure to protect the sacrifice's safety, leaving Guyan to gasp in shocked disbelief at his son's defiance. As Guyan's angry shouts echo through the castle, the narration notes that this marks his 7th trip to the underground prison. In a beautifully decorated bedroom filled with toys, a maid apologetically says, "I am so sorry for making you experience such a frightening ordeal." The maid explains to the young prince that to ensure his safety, His Grace ordered a new room to be prepared for him in the main castle instead of the annex. 2 servants carry a small white bed into the spacious new quarters as the maid highlights its amenities, noting that it includes a bedroom, dressing room, reception room, terrace, and an adjoining room. Looking down with deep regret, Hilda apologizes to the prince, admitting she never should have withdrawn his escorts regardless of what he said. Standing quietly in the background, the stern-faced nanny remains silent, observing the exchange. Hilda reassures the worried prince, telling him that since His Grace will be keeping a close eye on things now, he shouldn't have to worry for the time being. Smiling warmly, Hilda softly replies, "Yes." When the prince asks what will become of Lord Gayan, he recalls being told that Gayan will be locked up in the underground prison until His Grace decides to release him. The young prince looks down thoughtfully, softly murmuring, "Until he releases him, you say?" The prince turns around to look at his nanny, who stands tall and silent in the middle of his grand new parlor. Hilda adds a reassuring detail, mentioning that His Grace usually releases Guyan within around 10 days, which surprises the young prince. The prince expresses his gratitude, saying, "Thank you for telling me, Hilda," to which the nanny steps forward and responds that she is happy to share what she knows. In the elegant parlor, the nanny carefully pours a hot beverage from a beautiful teapot for the young prince. She places a steaming cup of tea in front of him, saying, "Here is some green tea." Taking the warm cup in his hands, the prince politely replies, "Thank you." The prince takes a small sip of his tea and gently tells his nanny, "You can go rest now too, nanny." The nanny stands silently for a moment before looking down at him with a serious expression and asking, "Is Vasilante treating you well, prince?" Startled by her sudden and heavy question, the prince stops drinking his tea and looks up in confusion. The nanny points out that they seem to be treating him remarkably well by attaching escorts and giving him the room once used by the Grand Duke's son, prompting the prince to ask what she is trying to say. With a stern and warning tone, the nanny replies, "I am telling you not to be fooled." She warns him, saying she understands how he might be temporarily tempted by the luxurious clothes and food he has never experienced before. Looking at the child with sharp, critical eyes, she continues, "But in truth, feeding and clothing a single prince well is not a big deal for them." She advises him that there is no real warmth or thought behind their charity, comparing their actions to simply dusting an ornament or refilling a vase with water. The nanny firmly tells the silent prince that they are merely managing what they have been given, rather than showing genuine care. The young prince looks down in tense silence, unable to find the words to respond. A quiet click is heard as the teacup is set back down on its saucer. The prince defends his actions, explaining that he is risking his life here and is only trying to get on the good side of the powerful people holding his lifeline. He argues that being cooperative is only natural, but the nanny sharply cuts him off, stating, "You are wrong." The nanny firmly reminds him of their promise, warning him that his role is not to get on their good side and that he must avoid getting closer to them than necessary. She outlines the terrifying consequences if it were ever discovered that he is a body double, and specifically if they found out that he is actually a girl, which would bring ruin to the imperial family. She asks him if the imperial family would have any reason to keep their promise to him if his secret were exposed, leaving the young child staring in wide-eyed shock. A heavy, tense silence fills the room as the hot tea sits untouched on the table. The nanny looks at him knowingly and asks, "You're terrified you won't be able to return to your prince, aren't you?" The child's eyes are cast in shadow as the nanny points out his deepest fear, that staying here too long might lead to a mistake. The young girl stands alone in her thoughts, terrified that a misunderstanding on her part will result in the real prince being dragged to this dangerous place next. Gripping her clothes tightly, she silently acknowledges her nanny's desperation, knowing how difficult it would be for the Empire to swap out a hostage a second time without starting a war. Looking down with a heavy heart, she thoughtfully reflects that while such an outcome would be tragic, she can easily guess how His Majesty would react to the situation. A close-up shot of the young prince with yellow blonde hair looking forward with deep seriousness, his brilliant purple eye reflecting a quiet determination. Standing tall and straight before the prince, the nanny maintains a cold, resolute posture as she warns him, "There are 6 princes, so what does it matter if there's one less?" Beneath her elegant dress, the nanny's hands are clenched together tightly, trembling with the heavy burden of their dangerous secret. The prince continues to look at her with an unwavering and mature gaze, completely unfazed by her warning. In a gentle tone, the prince replies, "But you don't feel that way, right, Nanny? Everyone has at least 1 or 2 people in their lives whose value can't be simply calculated like that." Turning his head slightly toward the beautiful sunset glowing outside the tall, elegant windows, he adds, "I'm the same, Nanny, so please, I don't want you to doubt my resolve again like you did today." Sitting firmly in his ornate chair, the prince's back is turned to the viewer as he declares with heavy, tragic finality, "I am going to die here as the Prince of Herda." Looking back at his nanny, the prince stands firm in his decision, declaring, "I won't beg them to save me, and I won't run away." Hearing the child's absolute resolve, the nanny bows her head low in respect and sorrow. A high-angle view of the beautifully decorated parlor at sunset, where the young prince sits quietly as his nanny bows deeply before him. Suddenly, the scene shifts to a dramatic stage performance under a brilliant spotlight, where a male actor in a green coat stands in a theatrical pose. Under another bright spotlight, a beautiful actress with long, flowing orange hair and brilliant jewelry stands on stage, facing away in sorrow. Watching the play from a private balcony, the young prince and a pink-haired girl look on as the actor cries out dramatically, "Harriet, don't go back." The actor pleads passionately, "You knew this was the only way things could end. Harriet, I can't understand." While backstage, a small blonde girl in a red dress watches from behind the curtain. The young blonde girl Letitia stares out with wide, tearful purple eyes, deeply moved by the scene as she repeats the tragic lines, "Are you saying that the week we spent together was nothing more than a blissful dream?" Backstage is a scene of utter chaos as staff members scramble back and forth, shouting, "Costume, where's Harriet's carriage scene outfit? It's right here. Get the young lady ready first, and bring the flower basket and the fake snow." As the director frantically asks where the young lady is, another staff member notes that he was helping Letty get into costume. A voice calls out, "Letitia, you're up next. Get ready, Letitia." Letitia stands frozen backstage in sudden panic until the stage manager grabs her shoulder to snap her out of her daze. The stage manager urgently tells her, "Why are you just standing here spacing out? It's your turn now." As Letitia looks up in utter shock, the manager pushes her forward, yelling, "You have to go out there, hurry!" while she stammers, "Right now?" With a sudden shove, Letitia is thrust directly onto the stage, completely unprepared. Standing under the blinding beam of the spotlight in front of a quiet audience, Letitia looks incredibly tiny and terrified. Sweat dripping down her face as panic sets in, Letitia thinks to herself in dread, "This is bad." Her eyes widen in sheer terror as she realizes the worst possible scenario, panicking, "I forgot my role." As the audience begins to whisper and murmur in confusion, she desperately racks her brain, thinking, "What was my first line again? No, was it an action instead of a line?" Letitia spots the male actor looking over at her with a tense expression, and she panics as she reads her cues. "Hey, what are you doing?" The actor glares at her, urgently gesturing and whispering, "Hurry up, that's your role." Suddenly, her terrifying role is revealed under a dark title, The Arsonist. Letitia stands holding a brightly burning torch, her eyes reflecting the orange flames. Staring at the blazing torch in her hands, Letitia whispers in confusion and shock, "What?" In an instant, the stage curtain catches fire, and bright orange flames violently surge upward as Letitia stands there in shock. The fire quickly spreads, completely engulfing the stage and the theater seats in a massive roaring blaze as Letitia stands frozen in the center of the inferno. Through the roaring flames, sinister, echoing voices whisper in her mind, asking, "Why aren't you burning? Why are you? Why? Why are you the only one?" Letitia collapses onto her hands and knees on the burning wooden floorboards, gasping for breath as she groans, "Gah! Coughing violently as heavy smoke fills the air, she chokes and desperately cries out, "It's hot! Hot, 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 hot! It's burning! It burns! Please save me! I can't breathe!" Desperately clawing at her throat, she feels the suffocating heat of the flames as she gasps, I can't catch my breath. I can't, save me, please. I can't breathe." Above her, a loud, ominous creaking sound echoes as cracks begin to spread across the ceiling from the intense heat of the fire. The cracks widen further, and the ceiling structure begins to fracture and fall apart. A heavy piece of debris breaks free and falls directly toward Letitia with a terrifying crash. With a sudden gasp, the young prince violently wakes up in bed, realizing it was all just a horrifying nightmare. Sweating profusely and clutching his chest, the prince tries to catch his breath, thinking, just now, a dream? But it felt so real. My chest still feels tight. The prince looks up in confusion to see a massive white fluffy head right in front of him. An adorable chibi illustration reveals the truth. The huge white wolf dog Tan has sneaked into the bed and is sleeping soundly right on top of the prince's chest. The sheer, heavy weight of the sleeping wolf dog is depicted, making it clear why the prince was having a suffocating nightmare. Coughing and gasping for air, the prince struggles, thinking, I almost suffocated to death. I couldn't push him off, so I barely managed to wriggle free. Looking down thoughtfully at the sleeping dog, the prince sighs. I knew I had a bad feeling about that dream, but I never thought Tan was the reason. Did I forget to close the door? How did he get in? Under the bright full moon shining over the castle, the prince resolves, starting tomorrow, I'd better make sure to lock my door properly. It seemed like the incident would end as nothing more than a late-night mishap, but the narration continues, but the next day, showing Tan squeezed onto the small bed yet again, sleeping soundly next to a displeased prince. And the day after that, Tan is sleeping upside down, completely smothering the prince's face with his big, warm white tail. No matter how carefully I lock the door, Tan always finds a way to sneak in and sleep on top of the prince, leaving the child completely squished and speechless. The next morning, a maid arrives to serve the young prince's breakfast in the elegant, sunlit dining room. Sitting at the breakfast table, the young prince thoughtfully wonders why the giant wolf dog Tan keeps sneaking into his locked bedroom every single night, especially since he never spoils him with treats. He reflects that by morning, the massive dog always vanishes without a trace, and the only evidence of his nightly visits is the white pet hair left scattered across the blankets. In the quiet, sunlit dining parlor, the nanny stands in her elegant blue gown with her head bowed and eyes closed. As the young prince sits at the table, the nanny politely announces that this morning's breakfast consists of bacon cheese soup and lamb steak. Turning slightly toward her, the prince softly thanks her as she prepares to serve him from her tea cart. A close-up shot shows the silver spoon dipping into the warm, golden bacon cheese soup, filled with bits of fresh corn, carrots, spinach, and savory bacon. The prince raises the warm spoonful of soup to his mouth, ready to take his first bite of breakfast. Standing silently nearby, the nanny looks down with a cold, blank, and completely unreadable expression. Suddenly feeling a chill, the prince sets his spoon down with a quiet clack, his purple eyes turning serious as he senses her icy gaze. Looking directly at her, the prince calmly requests to eat in peace and asks her to leave him alone, to which she quietly complies and bows. With a soft sliding sound, the heavy parlor doors close behind the nanny as she wheels her serving cart out of the room. Alone at last, the prince slumps in his chair, thinking about how incredibly awkward and tense things have felt between them ever since their confrontation. He sighs heavily, realizing that for the time being, he has no choice but to endure this suffocating atmosphere. A close-up shot reveals the prince's brilliant purple eyes, filled with a mixture of quiet sadness and deep contemplation. Just as he lifts his spoon to eat once more, the freckled maid Ina suddenly bursts into his thoughts with a panicked and desperate scream. Charging dramatically into the dining room, Ina cries out in terror, desperately warning the prince that he absolutely must not eat the food. Startled by her sudden and chaotic entrance, the young prince stares at her with wide, bewildered eyes. When he asks where she had been hiding, Ina bows her head low, apologizing for sneaking around but insisting she had no choice. Looking up at him with a pale, trembling face, she explains that she has a terrifying secret that she absolutely must share with him immediately. A close-up illustration reveals a mysterious white powder silently dissolving into the prince's warm soup bowl. Under a dark frame of thorny branches, a sinister silhouette reveals the terrifying truth. The nanny had secretly poisoned the prince's breakfast. The prince stands frozen in absolute shock as Ina's words echo in his mind, revealing that the nanny targeted the very food he was about to consume. Recalling the events of the past few days, Ina explains that she had grown increasingly suspicious of the nanny's recent behavior. She explains that although she was originally in charge of cooking and serving all of the prince's meals, the nanny suddenly and aggressively insisted on taking over those duties. Having no valid excuse to decline her request, Ina had reluctantly stepped aside and allowed the nanny to handle the meal preparation. Ina remembers a castle maid warning her about certain food restrictions, which had left her feeling anxious and confused. She explains that earlier that morning, a castle maid informed her about some rotten ingredients in the kitchen, prompting Ina to go investigate before they could be served to the prince. Upon arriving at the kitchen, Ina had peeked through the door and softly called out to the nanny. Peeking inside, Ina's eyes had widened in sheer horror as she witnessed something completely unexpected. Through the crack in the door, she had caught the nanny red-handed, surreptitiously emptying a packet of white powder directly into the prince's soup bowl. Returning to the present, the prince looks down in dark silence, absorbing the shocking revelation that his nanny was actively trying to poison him. Closing his eyes, the prince bitterly realizes how naive he had been to think that they could find some common ground, despite their difficult circumstances. Standing in a cold blue light, he reflects that since they were both hostages separated from their loved ones, he foolishly believed they might at least sympathize with one another. He had assumed that even if she disliked him, she would still cooperate for the sake of achieving her own ultimate goals. Staring at the nanny's cold turned back, he realizes with a heavy heart how completely mistaken he was. He reflects that her patience has clearly run out, and that to her, the exact manner of his death makes absolutely no difference. The prince recalls that the secret pact only required non-interference if the hostage died, meaning that speeding up his death by a few days was simply a logical and efficient choice for her to return home. A ghostly, transparent silhouette of the nanny looms ominously over the young prince as he contemplates her cold calculations. Suddenly snapping out of his thoughts, the prince turns his head quickly toward the door of the parlor. The scene shifts to the prince meeting with a tall, elegantly dressed nobleman in his private quarters, politely apologizing for the suddenness of his visit. The handsome, dark-skinned lord sits comfortably in his armchair, kindly asking the prince about the favor he has come to request. Looking back on his decision, the prince reflects that he had briefly considered ignoring Ina's warning and eating the poisoned food anyway. He contemplated that letting the poison take him might have put a mercifully quick end to his exhausting, lie-filled existence. Watching the dark-skinned lord listen attentively, the prince acknowledges that while dying might have been the easiest escape, he chose a different path. Looking up at the lord with a polite yet resolute smile, the young prince firmly requests that his nanny be sent back to the empire immediately. The lord looks surprised by the request, leaning forward to ask the prince for a more detailed explanation behind his sudden desire to dismiss her. Against a golden background of floral silhouettes, the prince's inner thoughts reveal that he has no intention of sharing the true, dark reason behind his request. His resolve hardens as he silently declares that he refuses to die a pointless, passive death, and if his end is truly inevitable, he will face it on his own terms. In a faded, sepia-toned memory, a young blonde child looks up in tense silence at a tall, imposing man standing beneath a starry sky. The blonde child's brilliant gaze is shown as the memory of a cruel voice echoes, mockingly commanding them to crawl on all fours like a dog to receive what they want. The beautiful woman with long dark hair holds the young boy's hands gently, telling him, "People like me are mages." The voice in his memories echoes, urging him, "Get on my back. Your insight and quick wit truly appeal to me." Below, a final thought resonates. "My death has value then, doesn't it? I want to at least determine the purpose for which I will die." The young prince looks ahead with his brilliant purple eyes, filled with quiet determination and deep contemplation. The cool night breeze gently blows through the open terrace doors, rustling the curtains of the quiet, dimly lit bedroom. In the spacious and luxurious bedroom bathed in a soft blue moonlight, the young prince sleeps soundly with the massive white wolf dog, Tan, curled up beside him. The prince rests peacefully under his blanket, completely unaware of the massive white dog sleeping soundly right next to his pillow. Suddenly, a dark silhouette quietly peeks through the small gap of the opening bedroom door. Hearing a faint rustling sound in the dark, the young prince slowly opens his eyes, immediately sensing a presence in his room. Startled by the unexpected sound, the prince's eyes widen as he panics, thinking, who could be coming at this hour? Could it be? Bracing himself for the nanny, the prince is utterly shocked to see a silver-haired boy standing before him, carrying the giant wolf dog on his back. The young prince gasps in sheer bewilderment, staring at the unexpected visitor with wide, startled eyes. Recognizing the boy, the prince stammers, "Ah, Lord Chamuka," while Chamuka simply clicks his tongue with an annoyed frown. The prince asks in surprise, "Were you sneaking into my room every time?" To which Chamuka nonchalantly replies, "What of it? Just go back to sleep." With a cool, defensive look, Chamuka asks, "Did you think I came to kill you in the dead of night?" And the prince sweat drops, replying, "It's not that." Looking at Chamuka, the prince thoughtfully wonders, if Tan keeps wandering outside to the point that he has to search for him, wouldn't it be better to just put a collar on him? But looking at the peacefully sleeping dog, the prince questions, "But why?" Chamuka remains silent, staring back at the prince with his piercing golden eyes. Trying to be helpful, the prince says, "If you would be so kind as to tell me where I should take him, I will take him there myself next time." Chamuka asks, "Are you not curious to know the reason I don't restrain him?" And the prince immediately replies, "I am." The prince sweat drops and sighs, thinking, "Even if I try to let the matter pass quietly." Chamuka explains, "Because I am certain that you did not leave him without a collar out of ignorance." Chamuka stands quietly, his expression softening as he carries his sleeping wolf dog. Chamuka remarks, "You have a sharp wit," causing the prince to feel a sudden wave of familiarity, thinking a familiar feeling like déjà vu. Chamuka reveals the central room on the 3rd floor, catching the prince completely off guard as his eyes widen in surprise. Turning to leave with the dog, Chamuka says, "I'll take him with me today, so you go to sleep." And the prince politely replies, "Ah, all right, return safely." Sinking back into his bed, the prince pulls up his blanket, sighing, "I don't know why confusing events keep following me all day long." As Chamuka walks out, the prince blinks in confusion and mutters, "What? Yes." The prince ponders in confusion, wondering, that happened during the day. How did the news spread so quickly? No, it seems she is just suffering from living in a strange land, so I wanted to take her circumstances into account so she could stay with her family. Chamuka notes, "I am currently in no position to return to the Empire, but the nanny is not. I also heard that it has been decided you will dine with us from now on." Chamuka asks, "Will this be a bother to you?" To which the prince replies, "Not at all." Chamuka then adds, "My father wishes to ensure your safety, so I think he will like that." The prince smiles weakly, saying, "All right," while inwardly grumbling he always does as he pleases. Chamuka looks back with a handsome, cool expression and says, "I'll see you tomorrow at the breakfast table." With a loud click, the heavy bedroom door shuts, leaving the young prince sitting alone in the quiet room, completely speechless. Seated at the grand dining table under a sparkling chandelier, the prince politely bows his head, saying, "Thank you for allowing me to join you, Your Grace." The prince wears a bright, charming smile as he reflects, "Last time I felt confused in several ways." His thoughts continue confidently, "But today I am confident in my ability to remain calm no matter what happens. And I don't think there is anything more confusing than being kidnapped while eating." The tense silence is broken as the Duke suddenly asks, "You requested to return the nanny to the Empire, didn't you?" Causing the prince to shudder slightly. Leaning forward with a serious and imposing gaze, the Duke firmly states, "I would like to hear the reason in detail." He presses further, repeating, "Did you ask to send your nanny back to the Empire? I'd like to hear the exact reason." The prince sweat drops and stammers, thinking to himself, "I feel like I've been getting asked the same thing since yesterday," as the curious questions from everyone echo in his mind. Maintaining his composure, the prince explains, "As I mentioned to N, my nanny seems to be struggling a lot with living in a foreign land. Is that going to be a problem?" The Duke shakes his head calmly and replies, "No, I was just asking to confirm." The Duke remarks, "No matter how accommodating the Grand Duke's castle is, it won't be as comforting as your nanny's touch." To which the prince politely reassures him, "It's not. Thank you for your concern, but I'm truly fine." The Duke responds, "I see. It's a relief to hear that. Actually, I've already prepared a carriage to send your nanny back to the Empire," leaving the prince completely stunned as he thinks, "That was fast." Looking at him reassuringly, the Duke says, "It will be done as the prince wishes, so you don't need to worry anymore." The Duke then gestures to the food, saying, "I've talked for too long. Let us finish our meal." And the prince politely nods, replying, "Okay." As the utensils clink against the plates, the prince reaches for his food while silently repeating, "Worry?" Staring down at his plate, the prince wonders in deep confusion. What does he mean by worry? Suddenly, a heavy, furious fist slams violently against the wooden table, shattering the quiet atmosphere. A furious and desperate voice screams from the other side, "Open the door!" Screaming in outrage, the nanny demands to know the meaning of this sudden treatment, furiously asking where they are trying to send her as she is forced into a carriage. With a cold and indifferent look, the commander tells the nanny to calm down, firmly informing her that she is being sent back to the Empire today. Desperately clinging to her role, the nanny yells through the carriage window, declaring that she cannot leave the prince behind since it is her duty to look after him. The commander simply scoffs with a cold smirk, completely unmoved by her desperate protests. In a private meeting room, the commander reports that poison was detected in the young prince's meal, to which the Grand Duke quietly responds. The commander continues, explaining that they secretly retrieved and investigated the poisoned food exactly as the Grand Duke had ordered. He reveals that the poison was so weak that the silver tableware didn't even react, but warns that it would still be highly dangerous for those with frail bodies, like children. The commander hesitates, sweat dropping as he prepares to share a concerning truth about the young prince's physical state. With a serious expression, the commander delivers his dark suspicion that the young prince has been suffering from physical abuse at the hands of his nanny. He points out that the prince's physique is exceptionally small for his age, noting that while natural build plays a role, there are more alarming factors. He recalls that when the young prince first arrived at the castle, he was so emaciated that his bones were showing, with blistered lips and rough, neglected skin. Concluding his report, the commander explains that the prince's nutritional state was terrible, suggesting that as an illegitimate child, he likely never received proper care. Furious, the Grand Duke slams his pen down, realizing that in the prince's fragile condition, even the slightest exposure to poison would have been fatal. The commander reminds him that the prince was brought under a secret pact, making him the property of the Vassalinte family, and that the Empire's spies were only tolerated for the prince's sake. The Grand Duke's anger flares as he writes, thinking that the only reason they allowed the Empire's eyes in his territory was for the prince's convenience. His thoughts turn deadly, resolving that they certainly did not tolerate spies so they could dare to touch what now belongs to the Vassalante family. With the letter finished, the commander calmly asks what they should do with the nanny now. Looking cold and ruthless, the Grand Duke tosses his pen aside and declares that they should deal with her the Vassalante way. Outside, the heavy carriage carrying the nanny begins its descent down the Grand Castle stairs, rattling loudly as it departs. The coachman nervously grips the reins, sweating under his breath as they head out of the secure castle gates. Watching from afar, the attendants discuss the nanny's grim fate, noting that sending a carriage with the imperial crest and no escort is a death sentence from bandits. The red-haired nobleman scratches his head in disbelief at the sheer cruelty of the punishment, sweating at the thought of what's to come. The commander calmly asks if he thinks they'll last 5 days, questioning if they will perish even sooner. With a relaxed look, the commander nonchalantly bets that they won't even last 3 days. The other attendants laugh and place their own bets, joking that since the Empire calls them barbarians, they might as well live up to the name. Sitting quietly with his tea, the young prince repeats the Duke's reassuring words in his mind, questioning what he truly meant by "no need to worry." Suddenly, the young maid Aina walks into the room, holding a heavy golden serving tray and smiling cheerfully. Just as the prince wonders if he is simply being paranoid, Aina calls out to him, startling him from his thoughts. Aina reassures him with a bright smile, promising that she will take excellent care of him from now on, so he won't have to worry or feel uncomfortable. The prince interrupts her with a calm demeanor, stating that there is something important he wants to tell her. A tense quiet fills the room as the young prince sets down his teacup, the atmosphere shifting instantly. Looking directly at her with a chillingly cold gaze, the young prince flatly states that he no longer needs her services. He coldly warns her that he is going to ask her a few questions, and depending on her answers, your fate will be decided. Aina drops her tray in shock and falls to her knees, crying out his name as he mentions sending her back to the Empire. Panicked, she asks what he is talking about, but the prince tells her to stop pretending she doesn't understand. The prince drops a bombshell, revealing that he already knows she is an imperial spy, and asks if she also knows his true nature. Aina desperately protests her innocence, swearing she hasn't lied, but the prince calmly points out that the entire nanny incident was highly suspicious. He raises a critical point, asking how she was able to recognize at a single glance that what the nanny had put in his food was poison. He questions why she would even suspect his own nanny of doing something harmful to him, catching Ina off guard as she scrambles for an excuse. Sweating profusely, Ina gasps as she realizes she has walked right into his trap, her mind racing to find an answer. The prince deconstructs her story, reminding her of her claim that she had accidentally seen the nanny in the kitchen and rushed to warn him because it felt off. He presses further, asking if she had been spying on the nanny as part of her mission, causing Ina to frantically deny it. Stuttering, Ina tries to explain that she was only keeping an eye on things because monitoring the prince's diet is her job. But the young prince coldly cuts her off, telling her that she has said more than enough. He tells her that even if he accepts her excuses and believes her reasons for watching the nanny, there is a much bigger issue. Grabbing her chin firmly, the prince looks into her eyes and declares that the nanny incident is far from the only reason he doubts her loyalty. In the quiet, blue-lit room, the young prince towers over the kneeling maid, keeping her face locked in his tight grip. His brilliant, piercing purple eye glints with dangerous intelligence as he stares right through her. Ina's heart pounds violently against her chest as cold sweat runs down her face, completely paralyzed by fear. The prince looks down in deep contemplation, whispering a chilling realization about who she truly is. Gripping her chin firmly, the young prince peers down at the kneeling maid, coldly telling her that she is lying to him. Keeping her face locked in his tight grip, the young prince looks down at the maid with a cold, piercing gaze and tells her that she is lying to him. Looking deeply into her terrified eyes, the prince asks if she did the same thing to her former master, catching Ina completely off guard. With a sudden movement, the young prince lets go of Ina's chin and she falls back onto the ground with a startled gasp. Standing over her coldly, the young prince asks if she is still going to deny it after everything, while Ina silently panics, realizing he already knew the truth. Her expression shifting to a subtle, knowing smile, Ina sweat drops as she reflects on how hard it is to fool the eyes of the prince, whom she refers to as the actor. Looking up at him with a mix of surprise and desperation, Ina asks if His Majesty told him that much, questioning if he truly doesn't remember her. Ina eagerly explains that she used to deliver flower baskets to his dressing room every now and then, startling the prince as he remembers. Ina beams brightly as she shares that the lady she used to serve was one of his biggest fans, adding how unbelievable it is that she now gets to serve him so closely. Ina happily notes that if they were in the capital, everyone would recognize His Highness because of how famous he is, but the prince coldly cuts her off and demands to know the truth about whether she was sent as a spy to watch him. Ina calmly explains that he's only half right, revealing that while the Empire did send her, she wasn't assigned to watch the prince, but rather to monitor the nanny. Crossing his arms skeptically, the young prince asks if she outranked the nanny, to which Ina replies that she is just a low-ranking observer assigned to watch another observer. Ina's sweat drops and protests that she is only 16, asking why they would entrust someone her age with such an important mission, but the prince remains highly skeptical of how readily she is answering. Desperately seeking his trust, Ina suddenly lunges forward and clasps his hands tightly, shouting that there is a reason. Holding his hands firmly, Ina smiles brightly and leans in close, declaring that they are in the same boat now. Looking at him with earnest golden eyes, Ina reassures the prince that she has absolutely no intention of harming him as long as she can stay safe, warm, and protect herself. Ina points out that the prince would also be in trouble without her, explaining that if both she and the nanny suddenly returned to the Empire, the imperial family would see His Highness as a risk, because no one would be left to watch over him. Ina warns him that if news of his death fails to reach the Empire, they might send a seasoned veteran next time who could easily slip into the castle as an ordinary servant. She explains that if the Empire sends a highly trained secret agent whose identity and motives are completely unknown, it will become far more troublesome than it is now. Ina gazes up at him with pleading eyes, desperately begging His Highness to keep her around, leaving the prince looking completely sweat-dropped and exasperated. Still doubtful, the prince asks how he can be sure she won't eventually try to return to her original master, just like the nanny did. Ina quickly waves off his concern, cheerfully telling him that he doesn't have to worry about that at all. Ina explains that the person she originally served was a frail young lady from a branch of the imperial family, and after she passed away, Ina had nowhere else to go but the imperial household. The young prince remained silent for a moment, contemplating her words in quiet thought. Ina bursts into tears and dramatically complains about how inexperienced she is, noting that she has only been on the job for 3 months and already got caught, leading the prince to sigh and finally give in. The prince sighs and tells her to keep working as his personal maid, while also reminding her that she can finally let go of his hand. Moved to tears of joy, Aina clasps her face happily, but the prince quickly warns her that they need to make one thing clear first. Standing with his arms crossed, the prince coldly states that it won't be long before he is dead anyway, so he truly doesn't need anyone's help. Drawn in a cute, simple style, Aina vigorously protests, pointing out that the Grand Duke has been treating him well and even threw the nanny out, while the prince sweat drops and quietly notes that the Duke only treats him well because he plans to kill him. The prince lets out a heavy sigh and sits down on a blue cushioned stool with a soft thud. Aina looks at him with concern and asks if he is having second thoughts, but the prince quietly responds that it isn't that. A flashback of the serious and imposing Duke appears in the prince's mind, echoing his reassuring words about sending the nanny back so the prince wouldn't have to worry anymore. Back in the present, Aina remarks that the nanny will probably get scolded a bit, but adds that she brought it upon herself by ignoring orders and acting on her own. The young prince gazes off to the side, quietly agreeing with her. A grim visual of a shattered, blood-splattered carriage appears as the prince reflects that even though they didn't part on good terms, he still hoped she would be all right. The scene reveals the complete wreckage of the carriage under a quiet sunset, pierced by arrows and stained with blood, contrasting sharply with the prince's innocent hope that she got back safely. The attendant speaks with the prince, confirming that the nanny's carriage left 2 days ago and asking if the prince is worried about her safe return. Smiling warmly, the attendant reassures the prince that the nanny wasn't too upset once she accepted her departure, adding that the Duke even gave her plenty of travel money, which makes the prince realize there's no point in dwelling on it. Walking down the sunny corridor, the prince reassures himself, thinking that he should believe she made it back safely since the Grand Duke is a gentleman after all. Suddenly, the young prince stops in his tracks, startled by a sound in the hallway. A pair of small, neat children's shoes take steps across the stone floor. Another pair of smart, polished leather shoes walks steadily down the corridor. The young prince looks up in surprise, letting out a soft gasp. Framed by beautiful pink roses, the prince stands face to face with a silver-haired boy as a polite greeting echoes, "Good afternoon, Lord Chamyuka." The silver-haired boy with striking golden eyes quietly gazes down at the prince. The young prince looks up at the taller boy, feeling a bit confused. Looking down at the prince, the silver-haired boy calmly points out that he had told him where his room was and asks why the prince never came to visit. The prince blinks in confusion, repeating the words, "your room," as his mind tries to process the question. A flashback shows the young prince sleeping peacefully in his bed, having locked his door by wedging a chair firmly against the handle so Lord Tan couldn't get in. Back in the present, the prince sweat drops as he realizes that after he locked the door, he had simply assumed Lord Tan had stopped coming altogether, seeing no reason to bring him over at night. The young prince and the silver-haired boy stand face to face in a high arched stone hallway of the castle. Looking surprised and sweat-dropped, Chamyuka blinks his purple eyes and asks, "Is that all you wanted to say? What exactly were you trying to ask?" A close-up shows the striking golden eyes of the silver-haired boy staring intently down at Chamyuka. Framed by a beautiful, decorative floral border, Chamyuka looks up in curiosity and asks, "Were you waiting for me to come?" The silver-haired boy stands silently, his face cast in shadow, exuding a serious and quiet presence. He explains that Lord Tan fell asleep outside Chamyuka's door and that he carried him back every single time. A close-up of his polished leather shoes as he continues, "So I knew there was no reason for you to bring Lord Tan to my room." The scene shows the shadows of the two boys stretching across the stone corridor floor as his voice continues, which means, he declares directly, "I wasn't waiting for you." Catching Chamyuka off guard, he looks up with wide purple eyes and asks, "Then why did you ask why I hadn't come?" The silver-haired boy looks back at Chamyuka with a quiet, calm expression. The silver-haired boy closes his golden eyes in a moment of silent thought. Walking away down the brightly lit corridor, he simply replies, "I don't know," leaving Chamyuka standing alone in confusion. Chamyuka watches him walk away, blinking in confusion. In the quiet of the blue-lit night, a beautiful white wolf lies curled up asleep on the floor outside a grand wooden door. Inside the dark room, a heavy wooden chair remains wedged firmly against the door handle to lock it. Chamyuka lies tucked safely in his bed in the spacious blue-toned bedroom. Turning over in bed under the blankets, Chamyuka stares blankly as he contemplates the boy's strange behavior earlier today, wondering if his question about why Chamyuka hadn't visited was actually genuine. Chamyuka gazes out with bright purple eyes, wondering to himself, was he inviting me? Chimuka sweat drops as he reflects on his recent interactions with Guyan, realizing that the imposing Grand Duke and his attendants only ever say eat your meal, eat your snack, or drink your tea, making it feel like none of them are capable of having a normal conversation. Resting on the floor by his bed, Chimuka looks down in curiosity, uttering a soft, In his room, under the starry night sky, the silver-haired boy sits on an elegant armchair, quietly polishing his sword with a cloth. Suddenly, he looks up in surprise at the sound of a soft knock on his door. Slowly opening the grand double doors, Chimuka peeks into the room wearing his white nightgown and slippers. Standing framed by a beautiful border of white flowers, Chimuka looks up politely and offers a quiet, "Hello." Standing inside the luxurious dressing room, Chimuka looks up at the silver-haired boy and politely says, "Excuse me, I was going to come get him." Looking down at the sleeping white wolf on the sofa, Chimuka continues, "I wanted to be the one to bring Tan here today. Should I stop doing that from now on?" The silver-haired boy turns his back slightly and indifferently replies, "Do as you please." Standing in the middle of the spacious, decorated dressing room, Chimuka awkwardly offers, "Well then, I should..." Backing away awkwardly with a sweat drop, Chimuka adds, "Since I've brought Tan back, I'll be going now," while thinking to himself about how incredibly awkward the atmosphere is. Suddenly, the other boy calls out, "Wait a moment." The silver-haired boy turns to him with a cold expression and instructs, "Stay until you've seen Tan lie down." He leans down and gently picks up the large white wolf from the sofa, while Chimuka watches him with a look of surprise. Chimuka watches in quiet contemplation. Holding the sleeping white wolf in his arms, the silver-haired boy pushes open the large double doors to another room. He walks toward a large, ornate wooden cabinet, prompting Chimuka to look on in surprise. Chimuka gazes inside, thinking, "This room is..." As the silver-haired boy responds, "That's right." The dressing room is lined with neat clothes racks holding various coats and elegant suits. Opening the lower doors of the large cabinet with a soft click, the silver-haired boy prepares to put the wolf inside. Inside the cabinet, a cozy bed of pillows and blankets has been neatly laid out for the white wolf to sleep on. The boy looks back over his shoulder at Chimuka and tells him, "I'll give you a moment to say goodnight," to which a startled Chimuka replies, "Okay." Waving his hand gently, Chimuka smiles and says, "Sweet dreams, Tan." But in his mind, he is completely bewildered, wondering why the wolf's bed is inside a storage cabinet in the dressing room. Chimuka contemplates the situation, thinking about how he thought Tan would have a room of his own, only to find he is kept in a storage cabinet inside the dressing room. Chimuka continues to ponder, noting that it's not as though the boy doesn't care about Tan, nor is the Grand Duke's castle short on rooms. Looking at the sleeping white wolf, Chimuka reaches a chilling realization, wondering, like he's trying to hide Tan? Suddenly, a loud, sharp sound echoes through the quiet dressing room, startling both boys. Startled, Chimuka gasps, "What was that just now?" while the silver-haired boy tisks in annoyance. In a sudden, swift motion, the silver-haired boy grabs Chimuka's arm and pulls him close. Holding Chimuka tightly against him behind a curtain, the boy presses a finger to Chimuka's lips and whispers, "Be quiet, don't even make a sound." Paralyzed with fear, Chimuka covers his mouth, sweating profusely with wide, startled purple eyes. The silver-haired boy's hand reaches out and tightly grips the handle of a heavy wooden door. The silver-haired boy stands with his back to the viewer, gazing quietly ahead. The silver-haired boy turns his head slightly, his sharp yellow-gold eyes filled with a quiet, serious expression. Suddenly, the double doors swing open as the imposing Grand Duke walks into the room, accompanied by an attendant. The Grand Duke looks on with a stern and cold expression as he declares, "Tan is supposed to remain in the tower." The Grand Duke stands tall in the dressing room, facing the young silver-haired boy, who looks back at him. The silver-haired boy stands in front of the clothing racks, silently observing his father's arrival. Hiding behind the heavy curtains, the young Prince Chimuka covers his mouth to suppress any sound, sweating profusely as a heavy, terrifying pressure fills the air. Defending his actions, the silver-haired boy reasons, "Surely it's fine for him to be outside once in a while. Even father has brought him out a few times." The Grand Duke coldly refutes him, stating, "That's a different matter. Besides, only the clone was permitted, not the original." A close-up reveals the striking, glowing golden eye of the silver-haired boy as he absorbs his father's harsh words. Stepping forward with determination, the Grand Duke firmly announces, "I'm taking Tan." Desperate to stop him, the silver-haired boy protests, shouting, "No, please leave Tan where he is." "I will hear no objections," the Grand Duke responds coldly, reaching down with a sharp clatter to grab the edge of the heavy wooden cabinet. With a loud, resounding crash, the Grand Duke effortlessly slides the massive cabinet aside, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Watching from his hiding spot, Chamukka is completely bewildered, wondering why the Duke is moving the cabinet instead of picking up the sleeping wolf, when suddenly a loud splintering sound echoes through the room. With a sharp, splintering wood sound, the floorboards break away, revealing a sleek, dark coffin hidden directly beneath the cabinet. To Chamukka's shock, the Grand Duke reaches down and lifts the heavy black coffin, which slowly drips a mysterious liquid as he holds it. Chamukka freezes in sheer disbelief, realizing that a coffin was hidden beneath the cabinet, as the Grand Duke indifferently says, "Let's go." With heavy, steady footsteps, the Grand Duke carries the coffin out of the room, leaving the silver-haired boy standing alone in silence. The silver-haired boy tightly clenches his fist in silent rage, his hand trembling as he watches his father walk away. Unable to contain his anger any longer, the boy opens his mouth and lets out a frustrated shout. He screams after them, "It's just a corpse anyway. He's already dead. What difference does it make whether his coffin is in the tower or here?" The attendant breaks into a nervous sweat at the boy's outburst, while the Grand Duke glances back over his shoulder with a chillingly cold look. Ignoring the boy's words, the Grand Duke turns back and continues walking away with the coffin. The young boy is left standing completely alone in the center of the room, staring at the shattered floor where the hidden coffin was once kept. A heavy silence falls over the room. The boy looks down, his expression cast in shadow as he softly utters, Chamukka, the boy calls out quietly. Chamukka slowly steps out from behind the curtain in his nightgown, looking up at him with wide, startled eyes. Chamukka nervously asks, "I know this isn't the right time to ask, but what exactly did His Grace the Grand Duke take away?" To which the boy bluntly replies, "I told you, it was Tan." Confused, Chamukka points toward the cabinet and notes, "But Tan is right here," prompting the boy to reveal the chilling truth. "That's only the clone." Chamukka blinks in utter confusion, repeating, "The clone?" With a somber, serious look, the silver-haired boy explains, "Tan was originally a person. He was my younger brother." He adds coldly, "And he's already dead." Overwhelmed by the shocking revelation, Chamukka sweat drops and quietly asks, "Are you sure you don't need to follow His Grace?" Staring blankly at the empty gap in the floor, the boy indifferently replies, "Why would I?" He quietly turns away, leaving Chamukka with the haunting question, "Didn't he?" In the quiet, blue-toned darkness of the night, Chamukka lies tucked in his grand bedroom, unable to find peace. Tossing and turning restlessly under his blankets, Chamukka sighs to himself, "I can't sleep." Staring blankly into the dark, he thinks, "It's because I insisted on bringing Tan back, and ended up seeing something like that. I just can't stop thinking about it." He continues to contemplate, recalling the boy's face and wondering, "Earlier I thought he might have been crying." A flashback of the quiet, shadow-cast face of the silver-haired boy plays in Chamukka's mind. Chamukka remembers the boy looking back at him, his striking golden eyes filled with an intense, unreadable sadness. He recalls the harsh words the boy had spoken. "Everything inside this castle belongs to Father, even you of all things." The memory of the boy's cold warning, "Don't speak beyond your place," echoes in Chamukka's mind as he lies wide awake in the dark. Chamukka slowly closes his eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming thoughts. The peaceful, blue-lit bedroom remains still under the quiet, starry night, framed by delicate white lilies. Chamukka reflects on the bizarre truth, thinking that it sounded like a sick joke to hear that Tan, the beloved dog of the Grand Duchy, was actually a human, that he was the young lord of the family, and that he was already dead. He contemplates that if anyone else had told him such an absurd story, he would have laughed it off as a total lie. But coming from someone who doesn't even know what a joke is, Chamukka had no choice but to believe it. However, a few burning questions still lingered in his mind. He wonders to himself, why did Tan become a dog? And why was his coffin kept here instead of giving him a proper funeral? He stares out, realizing that if what the boy said is really true, then the secrets of this Grand Duchy are far deeper and darker than he could have ever imagined. A flashback shows the silver-haired boy walking through the garden with the white wolf, Tan, while Chamukka watches them from afar. The narration reads, "How did Lord Chamukka feel leading Tan, and who is supposedly dead, around the Grand Duke's castle?" Chamukka stands bathed in bright garden light, looking thoughtful as the narration asks, just what kind of feelings was he harboring? The silver-haired boy stands with his back turned, coldly warning Chamyuka, "Don't overstep your bounds." Chamyuka gasps silently, his eyes wide with shock and fear at the cold warning. Cast in shadow, Chamyuka looks down with a saddened, heavy expression. The scene transitions to a grand, misty bathhouse where rose petals float on the sparkling water. Chamyuka stands in the center of the deep pool as a maid prepares to attend to him. A close-up of Chamyuka in the warm bathwater, his face solemn and deep in thought. The maid approaches with a towel, concerned by his demeanor, and asks, "Your Highness, what's on your mind? You have such a gloomy expression." In a cheerful chibi-style scene, the maid happily scrubs Chamyuka's arm with soap while he looks on with a sweat drop. Chamyuka protests, "I didn't get assigned an exclusive maid just to be waited on," but she brightly cuts him off, saying, "Oh, don't be like that. Tilt your head back, I'll wash your hair." Giving up, Chamyuka sighs, "Do whatever you want." As she pours warm water over his head, the maid asks, "Do you know what surprised me the most when I first saw you, Your Highness?" To which Chamyuka simply asks, "What was it?" Gently running her fingers through his wet blonde hair, she explains, "I thought you had curly hair. At first I thought you straightened it on purpose, but even when wet, it stays perfectly straight." Chamyuka tilts his head back in curiosity and asks, "Why curly?" prompting the maid to hesitate before saying, "Well." Leaning in close, the maid whispers, "Back when you were a baby, you had such angelic curly hair." Seeing a tiny angelic thought bubble of himself, Chamyuka deadpans, "You're talking about my role in Rachacha's trial." The maid proudly crosses her arms and laughs, "Well, curly or straight, it doesn't matter. I just realized that something else is much more important." Looking over his bare shoulder, Chamyuka's striking purple eyes glisten in the misty bath. Framed by elegant white lilies, Chamyuka softly asks, "What do you mean?" The maid eagerly urges him, "Don't be shy. You know it too, Your Highness. It's your exceptional beauty. Please lie back so I can lather it." Sweat dropping, Chamyuka sighs, "I was wondering what you were going to say." Lying back as she shampoos his hair, Chamyuka notes confidently, "Isn't that a given? Appearance is one of the basic qualifications, after all," while a note specifies he means for an actor. Chamyuka asks, "What, do you want me to act coy and pretend otherwise like usual?" To which the flustered maid quickly waves her hands and says, "Ah, of course it's totally fine to speak openly with me." With a warm smile, she explains, "What I meant was, since you are so outstandingly beautiful, I was thinking maybe that's why His Grace and the eldest young lord cherish you. That's what I meant." Hearing the mention of the eldest young lord makes Chamyuka flinch. Chamyuka looks at her seriously and says, "I mean Lord Chamyuka. He hates being called the eldest young lord," leaving the maid completely surprised as she blinks and asks, "Pardon?" A close-up of Chamyuka's serious purple eye as he explains, "That's probably because he hates being treated like someone who doesn't have a younger brother." A striking background graphic emphasizes Chamyuka's thought, but eldest young lord is a title that refers to only one person. The maid thoughtfully suggests, "Then you should ask him next time." Chamyuka turns away and dismissively replies, "I don't know either. Anyway, don't call him that." The maid insists, "That's one thing, but if you're curious, you should just ask him." Chamyuka defensive shield goes up as he retorts, "Ask him what? If he tells me not to do something, I just shouldn't do it." Looking at him with a soft and encouraging gaze, the maid advises, "Since your highness will be staying in the Grand Duchy from now on, I think you can afford to do as you please a little bit." Hearing this, Chamyuka gasps in realization. The maid blinks in utter confusion as Chamyuka suddenly sits straight up, determination written all over his face. With a massive splash, Chamyuka plunges his entire face into the hot bathwater, shocking the maid as she screams in horror, "Gyak!" Water sprays everywhere as she frantically calls out, cold water in a towel." Wiping his red, steaming face with a towel, the maid scolds him, "Oh my goodness, how could you dunk your face in when the bathwater is so hot?" Blush-faced and dripping, Chamyuka sheepishly murmurs, "You're right." Staring down at his hands clutching the towel, Chamyuka softly mutters, "No." With a look of fierce determination in his wet purple eyes, Chamyuka makes a silent decision. A firm knock resounds against a heavy, decorated wooden door. Standing outside the grand chambers, Chamyuka waits as a servant announces, "Lord Chamyuka, it's Xian Herta." Inside the dim room, the silver-haired boy sits in shadow, resting his face in his hand. When Chamyuka announces, "I have something to tell you about last night," the boy coldly replies, "I don't. Go back." Chamyuka stands his ground, his eyes shining with absolute resolve as he declares, "I do. I think you need to bring the coffin back, Lord Chamyuka." In a sudden motion, the silver-haired boy flings the heavy door open, glaring out at Chamyuka with a fierce golden eye. Looking down at Chamyuka with an icy glare, the silver-haired boy demands, "Not to overstep your bounds? A mere hostage shouldn't interfere in Vasalante's affairs. Go back." Chamyuka steps forward and bluntly asks, "Why did you just watch as His Grace took the coffin yesterday?" The silver-haired boy scowls and snaps, "Do you have a bad memory? I told you that everything in this castle belongs to my father," only for Timuka to interrupt. "You wanted to chase after it, Lord Timuka." A close-up shows the silver-haired boy's golden eye widening as Chamyuka's words strike a deep chord. Chamyuka stands tall and proud, framed by blooming white roses, looking at the silver-haired boy with earnest sincerity. Against a soft background of white daisies, the words appear, "Because you wanted to mourn Lord Tan." A mystical image of the sleek black coffin floating amidst sparkling bubbles is displayed. Gritting his teeth in frustration, the silver-haired boy demands, "Stop talking nonsense. Why does that coffin even matter?" Standing tall in his elegant dark outfit, Chamyuka points out, "Vasalants do not act on such emotional impulses. If that's true, why did you keep Lord Tan's coffin in your room?" Looking down at the two of them standing in the grand doorway, Chamyuka continues, "You already knew the coffin couldn't be taken out of the tower, yet you went out of your way to hide it under a cabinet? Wasn't it because you were just that desperate?" Chamyuka leans in closer, his voice filled with passion as he says, "Just as you said, I thought I was overstepping my bounds, so I tried to stay quiet. However, no matter how much I think about it, it seems like you just don't want people to think." A close-up reveals the silver-haired boy's stunned expression as Chamyuka delivers his final, chilling realization that you were suffering. "And you feel you have no choice but to say things like this," Xian thinks as he looks away, his golden hair catching the light. "Then I will give you a push." Determined to break through Chamyuka's cold walls, Xian steps forward and places his hand gently on Chamyuka's chest. "I will become your excuse, Lord Chamyuka," Xian says softly, his words catching Chamyuka by surprise. As Chamyuka sits by the window, he quietly reveals a dark truth. Tan's life was in danger from the moment he was born. Chamyuka explains the tragic circumstances of his brother's birth, saying, "So, right before she collapsed, my mother transferred Tan's soul into a dog's body." Xian listens intently as Chamyuka continues. Thanks to that, he was able to stay in the Grand Duke's castle even in the body of a dog, but Chamyuka looks down, his voice heavy as he asks, "His original body lost its soul, so can you really call that being alive?" Chamyuka reflects on the bizarre situation of his sibling, stating, "Tan is a dog. He barks, walks, and eats like a dog." Chamyuka explains, "It's no different from being dead, but my father couldn't accept that fact, so he kept the coffin in the same tower where my sleeping mother rests." Xian looks at him softly before asking, "Do you want to bury him?" Cast in warm sunlight, Chamyuka remains silent, a look of profound sadness washing over his handsome face. Xian's striking purple eye glistens with determination as he watches Chamyuka's reaction. Xian's shadow falls across the floor as he offers, "Let's go get the coffin back together." Skeptical, Chamyuka simply asks, "Why?" Xian sits poised in his chair as Chamyuka questions his motives, asking, "For what reason should I do that?" Xian smiles warmly with closed eyes, radiating a calm confidence that catches Chamyuka off guard. "Because if you don't listen to me, Lord Chamyuka, I'll just drop dead right here," Xian declares with a surprisingly cheerful smile. Chamyuka stares back at him, completely stunned by Xian's bold and unexpected threat. A close-up reveals Chamyuka's golden eye widening in shock as he processes Xian's words. Turning back to look at Xian, Chamyuka asks seriously, "What do you think will happen if my father finds out about this?" Framed by gorgeous white anemones, Xian cheerfully retorts, "Well, what of it? The worst he could do is kill me anyway." Drawn in a whimsical crayon style, the title card reads, "Operation Get Tan Back." The childish diagram outlines their plan. Step 1, wrap the prince in cloth so no one can see his face. Step 2, pass the prince off as Tan and trick the guards into letting us inside the tower. Tell them we're bringing Tan back into the tower. Step 3, get the coffin back. In another cute drawing, Xian and Chamyuka celebrate joyfully under a floating, sparkling black coffin. Hiding behind a massive tree trunk under the starry night sky, Xian nervousness asks, "Do you think it'll work?" To which Chamyuka firmly replies, "It has to." Chamyuka looks over his shoulder and points out, "Pretending to be Tan to fool the guards was your idea in the first place, remember?" Looking towards the heavily guarded tower entrance, Chimuka explains, "After what happened yesterday, even I am barred from entering, so we don't have a choice. The only one who can get past the guards is Tan, since they've been ordered that he must remain in the tower. And only a handful of people know that Tan is actually a coffin. Which means the guards won't know any better if you go in pretending to be a dog," Chimuka says as he holds up a large white sheet, offering, "Here." Shion swallows hard and breaks into a nervous sweat as he looks at the massive cloth meant to cover him. Chimuka wraps him up and instructs, "You should stretch out your arms and legs. You're smaller than Tan, so you need to look bigger." Squirming inside, Shion asks, "Like this?" While Chimuka warns, "Not too far. You can't let them stick out from under the cloth." Hearing approaching footsteps, a silver-haired knight at the entrance perks up and turns around. Chimuka walks forward under the starry night, carrying a large white bundle that completely hides Shion. Approaching the entrance, the guard bows respectfully and says, "Greetings, young master." The guard informs him he's inside the tower. Chimuka closes his eyes and replies, "All right then," as he prepares to move forward. The guard stops him with his spear, saying, "My apologies, but His Grace has forbidden you from entering the tower." Chimuka calmly counters, "I know, I'm only dropping Tan off. I'll be right back out." Staring at the bundle suspiciously, the guard demands, "Then send him in from here." Shion's heart beats wildly in fear inside the dark cloth as Chimuka quickly thinks on his feet, replying, "Tan's asleep. Will you carry him in then, Sir Knight?" Chimuka stares the guard down and challenges him, "You're not to set foot inside the tower under any circumstances, and you're not to let Tan go outside on his own. Aren't those the orders you're supposed to prioritize above all else?" The guard breaks into a nervous sweat, realizing Chimuka has successfully trapped him with his own conflicting orders. Reluctantly, the guard yields, stating, "Only for a moment." As the massive doors of the tower swing open to reveal a bright light, the guard anxiously whispers, "You mustn't let His Grace catch you." The guard watches with a stressed and worried expression as Chimuka enters. The heavy door slams shut with a loud thud, locking Chimuka and Shion inside the dim, blue-lit hallway. Feeling the bundle wiggle, Chimuka whispers, "We're in the clear now," as Shion begins to squirm. With a swift rustle, the white cloth is pulled away. Shion lets out a massive sigh of relief, gasping, "Phew." A close-up of Chimuka's golden eye shows him silently watching Shion's reactions. Shion catches his breath and gasps, "We actually made it in somehow. I can't believe that worked." Chimuka simply responds, "Yeah." Looking around the grand, shadowy corridor, Shion mutters, "But this place?" Shion gazes up at the majestic wooden spiral staircase winding into the dark, thinking, "I've been wondering since we came in. This is the same tower His Grace brought me to last time, isn't it?" Chimuka's gaze suddenly turns terrifyingly sharp as he glares down at Shion, saying, "You certainly got a good look at it. I'm sure I told you to keep your eyes closed," causing Shion to flinch in sheer guilt. Chimuka walks forward inside the dim hall, telling Shion, "Forget it. We've come this far. There's no point hiding it now." Shion looks on in surprise as Chimuka commands, "Just follow me." Shion quickly runs up the stairs after Chimuka, responding, "Oh, yes." Chimuka stops in front of a grand, ornately decorated wooden door and announces, "It's this room." As they walk, Chimuka explains, "Tan's coffin is in here. Father is probably with Mother on the top floor, right above us. If we're careful, we shouldn't run into them." Chimuka pauses and turns back, saying, "By the way." Chimuka looks at Shion and bluntly asks, "Is your stamina really that bad?" Shion looks back at him with an extremely offended and exasperated expression. A cute layout of the tower displays their current location near the top as Shion angrily protests, "We climbed almost all the way to the top without taking a single break. Any normal person would be tired after that." Chimuka opens the door and says, "We have to leave as soon as I grab the coffin, so catch your breath while you can," to which Shion tiredly groans, "Okay." Huff. Shion gasps in astonishment as he steps into the room. The room is filled with beautiful, magical laboratory apparatuses, shining instruments, and glowing blue flowers. Looking around, Shion thinks, "Whoa, a laboratory? Or maybe a workshop? Is this where Lady Astrid used to work?" As Chimuka suddenly utters, "It's gone." Chimuka kneels on a glowing magic circle on the floor, frantically searching as he says, "It should be right here." Chimuka stares blankly in defeat, announcing, "Tan's gone." Shion stands completely stunned by the sudden news. Chimuka breaks into a sweat, wondering, was the coffin moved somewhere outside the tower? Chimuka's inner thoughts drift, but if they were going to keep it somewhere else, why take it from me in the first place? Xian gazes at the kneeling Chamyuka, wondering, they moved it? Why? Where? Reaching his hand down to the glowing circle, Xian wonders, if it isn't here, then where could it be? As Xian touches the circle, a powerful magical resonance surges, causing his purple eye to glow. In a vision of the past, the Grand Duke stands in the dark tower, holding a glowing lantern. A close-up of the Grand Duke shows a cold, sorrowful expression on his handsome face. A beautiful woman named Astrid lies asleep inside a glowing glass coffin surrounded by lilies and roses as the Grand Duke mutters, Astrid. A close-up shows the Grand Duke looking down with deep sadness. Looking at his sleeping wife, the Grand Duke promises, tomorrow, I'll come back. The Grand Duke turns away with his lantern, causing the water around Astrid's coffin to ripple. As the ripples spread, the Grand Duke whispers, Astri, only for a strange rumbling to begin. The Grand Duke looks around in shock as the entire room shakes violently. Outside, the guards look up in terror as the massive stone tower rumbles, shouting, the tower! Cracks form rapidly and debris begins to fall as the tower starts to collapse. Huge stone pillars shatter and crash down as a guard screams, it's coming down! Water splashes violently in the chaos as a blazing fire erupts below. In another memory, Letitia's sister comforts her wet, crying younger self in a burning room, saying, it's okay, Letty, you can do it, while Letty cries, sister, no, I'm scared. Letitia tearfully protests, then what about you, sister? If only I get out, what will happen to you and the others? As people scream around them to break the door down, Letitia insists, I'm not going, I'm staying with you. Letitia cries out, I'd rather just die herewith, but her sister grabs her tightly, yelling, Letitia! Letitia's sister looks at her with absolute desperation and love, leaving Letitia silent and stunned. A man runs past the flames, shouting, Eerie, hurry, you have to go now! A small, narrow gap under the burning debris is revealed as the only escape route. The man tells Letitia, the passageway has almost collapsed too, but it seems less blocked. You're small, so you should be able to pass through it just fine. Letitia turns to look back one last time, framed by a gorgeous bouquet of yellow flowers. Letitia sees her beloved family and friends smiling warmly at her. Her family reassures her, saying, we'll be fine, Letty. We'll follow you out soon. They urge her onward, calling out, go, hurry, get out, don't look back. A hand tightly grips the ledge as Letitia is told, hurry before this place collapses further. Don't worry, you have to get out for us to live. Get out as fast as you can and seek help from the outside. Letitia crawls into the dark passageway, crying as she realizes, that's a lie. With a fire this big, there's no way people outside don't know. They must have already started trying to put it out. The fire's just too big for them to control. Letitia continues crawling through the narrow, dark tunnel, thinking, I have to go. Pitch blackness with no sense of front or back. I can't even tell if I'm moving forward or just going in circles. Losing consciousness, Letitia thinks, is the reason my vision keeps fading because it's so suffocatingly tightly closed on all sides? Or because I'm exhausted and getting sleepy? Or simply because my eyelids are slowly closing? Xian suddenly wakes up back in the present as Chamyuka calls out in alarm, Prince! Xian looks around in a daze, trapped under the collapsed tower ruins, and asks, huh? Where is the tower? Chamyuka asks tiredly, before breaking the grim news. The tower collapsed and we're trapped. Xian looks up in stunned silence as Chamyuka asks, are you coming to your senses now? Asking how he is feeling, Chamyuka listens as Xian replies, my arm got scraped a bit, but other than that, I think I'm fine. Sitting together in the dark, debris-filled room, Xian looks at Chamyuka and optimistically says, I guess you could call this lucky, right? Chamyuka stares blankly and dryly counters, being that positive is practically a disease, or did you hit your head wrong when you fell? To which Xian sweat drops and protests, no, I mean, we fell from that height, so we're incredibly lucky to get away with just this. Chamyuka lifts his finger into the air, silently feeling for a draft of wind in the darkness. Noting that Xian might have a point, Chamyuka instructs, I guess you're not entirely wrong. Move that board-like thing over there. I think there's air coming through behind that board. Grunting with effort, Xian pushes a heavy wooden board aside, gasping in surprise as a bright light floods into the dark space. Peering through the opening, Xian excitedly turns back and announces, there's a passageway if we go out this way. Xian's eyes suddenly widen in utter shock and horror as he turns to look back at Chamyuka. Xian sees Chamyuka sitting silently on the floor, his right trouser leg torn open to reveal a massive, bleeding gash with a large pool of dark blood collecting on the stone. Close-up reveals the severe wound on Chamyuka's leg as fresh blood continues to drip and pool heavily onto the floor. Xian frantically asks, "Since when?" While Chamyuka calmly replies, "It's been like this since I opened my eyes. I must have hit something wrong while falling." Xian desperately offers, "If I support you," but Chamyuka sighs, "I'm bleeding quite a bit, so I can't move, and it hurts." Chamyuka explains their grim reality, stating the tower has already collapsed once and is in an unstable state. If you try to force your way through with an injured person, the passageway might collapse and crush us both, so I'm out. Looking Xian in the eyes, Chamyuka advises, "Your best bet is to get out first and bring back help." A wide shot displays the massive, tragic heap of stone ruins that once stood as the Grand Tower under the starry night sky. Outside the ruins, a guard yells in a panic, "His Grace the Grand Duke is still inside the tower." The commander commands, "All mages and knights within the Grand Duke's castle, focus your efforts on rescuing His Grace," before a deep, commanding voice interrupts, ordering, "Step back." The commander and Letitia freeze in absolute shock, slowly turning their heads toward the source of the voice. A blinding, powerful blue magical flash suddenly erupts from the dark, collapsed stone rubble of the tower. The ground shakes violently under the massive magical pressure as people shout, "Step back! Step back!" A thunderous, magical shockwave shatters the night with a massive boom. As the sparkling dust and smoke begin to settle, a single, polished black boot steps out from the ruins. Battered, bloodied, and looking incredibly imposing, the Grand Duke emerges from the debris carrying his beloved, sleeping Astrid tightly in his arms. Carrying Astrid forward, the Grand Duke commands, "Call for a doctor. I need to see if Astrid is safe," while a knight urges, "Your Grace, right now, your condition is worse than Her Grace's." And Letitia offers, "I will escort Her Grace for now." Walking away, the Grand Duke mutters, "It's just a scratch," prompting a stressed knight to yell, "The tower collapsed. What do you mean it's just a scratch? Sir!" A knight frantically approaches the Grand Duke, shouting, "Sir, no, Your Grace, you are safe," causing the Grand Duke to turn and coldly ask, "What is the matter?" The gatekeepers brought up a strange report, and the knight reveals they say the eldest young master is inside the tower, leaving Letitia and the other guards completely stunned. A wave of shocked murmurs spreads through the crowd as they process the unbelievable news. A close-up shows the Grand Duke's face turning icy cold, his golden eyes narrowing with dark intensity. The gatekeepers drop to their knees, trembling in terror as the Grand Duke mutters, "Chamuka's entry was supposed to be forbidden," and they beg, "Forgive us, Your Grace." Sweating profusely, one gatekeeper explains, "The eldest young master said he was going to bring Lord Tan inside the tower. Lord Tan was asleep, so we could not touch him. Thus, we considered it the best course of action at the time." In a brutal, sudden flash, the Grand Duke slashes his sword through the gatekeeper, drawing a spray of blood as the man screams, "Ah!" while the Grand Duke coldly declares, "I do not understand what you are saying." The gatekeeper collapses to the ground in agonizing pain, groaning, "Ugh, while the other gatekeeper looks on, paralyzed with fear. Looking down with a terrifying dark aura, the Grand Duke points his sword at the remaining gatekeeper and demands, "You, tell me again." As blood slowly drips from the tip of his sword, the terrified gatekeeper stammers, "We disobeyed orders and let the eldest young master inside the tower," to which the Grand Duke cuts him off, stating, "No, that's not it." The gatekeeper is interrogated, "So what was Chamuka doing with Tan?" and frantically responds, It was definitely Lord Tan, although we couldn't confirm it directly because he was wrapped in a blanket. Lord Chamuka was carrying him as usual, and above all, that presence was definitely not something like a doll." The commander's eyes widen as he gasps in realization. The prince! The commander looks toward the Grand Duke and the other knights, suddenly piecing together Xian's secret disguise. Sweat dropping, the commander explains, "No, I was thinking about who could possibly imitate Lord Tan, and I figured it would be difficult with an adult size." He continues nervously, "Lord Chamuka is not the type of person to do something like this alone either. Forgive me, it seems I overthought things." Only for the Grand Duke to whisper, "No." Before he can finish, a massive, fiery explosion violently erupts from the collapsed ruins behind them. The knights and onlookers scream in horror. "Explosion! It's an explosion! There's an explosion in the collapsed ruins!" as bright flames engulf the area. A dramatic panel displays the roaring sound of the explosion tearing through the stone rubble. As a giant pillar of fire shoots into the sky, Chamyuka yells in sheer disbelief, "What are you doing right now?" Inside the dark ruins, Shion stands beside a blazing bonfire he has just built and lit, replying, "Lighting a fire," prompting Chamyuka to scream, "I mean, why? Are you trying to burn us to death before the flames even reach here, or what?" Shion suddenly places his hands firmly on Chamyuka's shoulders, saying, "Don't do anything weird and just go out to get people, Lord Chamyuka." Looking directly into Chamyuka's golden eyes with a serious, intense expression, Shion asks, "Do you resent me?" Shion looks seriously at Chamyuka under the burning ceiling, asking, "Do you resent me?" Chamyuka, looking down in despair, responds, "Why would I? Because I was the one who dragged you into this, Lord Chamyuka." Shion defends him, saying, "Ha, who dragged who? If anything, it's my fault for acting so emotionally." Shion bows his head, sobbing and admitting, "I regret it," while Chamyuka looks at him in surprised silence. Chamyuka raises his head, looking intently at Shion, and asks, "Hey, what are you thinking about right now?" Text bubbles declare with absolute determination, "I will never run away alone, and I am going to save you, Lord Chamyuka." Chamyuka tries to step forward but grunts in pain, warning, "Wait, don't tell me you're doing something crazy. Ugh." Standing before a towering wall of blazing fire, Shion prepares to act as Chamyuka screams in panic, "Don't do it." Shion pauses, looking back slightly as the roaring fire rages around him, thinking, just in case. Shion apologizes in advance, saying, "Things might get ugly if this doesn't work out. I will apologize for that in advance. I am sorry." Leaving Chamyuka calling out in shock, "You!" Chamyuka screams, "Stop! Come back!" as Shion steps into the fire, reflecting that only in the face of death can one truly understand what others felt. Narration panels within the bright yellow flames list the raw emotions felt in that final moment: sorrow, fear, and something more than that, deep affection. Staring into the flames, Letitia pleads, "If there is a God, please help me just this once," remembering her older siblings and family who willingly stayed behind in the fire for her sake. An elegant decorative frame contains the prayer, "Please give me the courage to act without hesitation." Over a soft beige background adorned with lilies, narration states, "There is a stone inside of me." The narration explains that the stone is silent but heavy, occasionally rattling and making Shion's chest feel uncomfortably warm whenever it makes a sound. As Shion walks through a sparkling green forest, the text notes, "The stone would rattle without warning." Shion sits in a grand chair with eyes shadowed, as narration states the rattle happens even while doing normal things like walking down the street, or eating a meal, or sleeping, as Shion sits up in bed, clutching his chest. A flashback shows young Shion being told, "You are a mage, just like me." The woman explains that magic usually awakens naturally, but can be forcibly awakened by clashing with an opposing element, suggesting, "Since you have the energy of water like me, maybe you could try going underwater?" She reassures him, saying, "Don't worry, an opposing element could never kill you," as a close-up shows young Shion wearing his pendant. Distressed black and white panels depict scenes of fire, screaming, and a family separating in the chaos. Another black and white panel shows young Letitia looking up at a kind gentleman in a top hat who reaches his hand out to her. "The truth is, I am afraid of death." A burning building with charred figures is shown as text describes fire as red, hot, agonizing, and leaving nothing but pitch-black ashes. A drawing of a skull appears alongside the line, "But what I fear more than death?" Young Letitia is shown huddled alone amidst massive ruins, with the text concluding, "Is life." Letitia looks forward with a hollow gaze, thinking that surviving alone, reeking of soot, is what truly terrifies her. Footprints leading away from ashes are shown as she reflects that living like a living corpse is far more terrifying than burning alive. Wisps of smoke curl upward as the text states, "Just like Lady Astrid said, I turn out to be such an incredibly powerful mage that I don't die in these flames, but end up living instead." Dark, thorny branches surround a wilted rose, with the text asking, "How much would I have to hate myself?" A blue-haired man stands in awe under a sudden, heavy downpour of rain. Raindrops splash against the Grand Duke's face as he looks up, whispering, "Rain?" The onlookers and knights stand in absolute shock under the pouring rain, crying out, "It's a miracle." A woman suddenly stumbles and turns to walk back towards the collapsed tower. A close-up of the woman's brilliant green eyes filled with determination as she says, "Over there." She runs off with immense urgency, pointing and shouting, "It's over there!" The Grand Duke commands everyone except Yen follow the head maid, as another knight asks in confusion, "What is going on all of a sudden?" Splash sound effects are shown as she runs through puddles, thinking, "I can feel it. Over there, something." Sweat and rain trip down her face as her green eyes widen in shock, thinking, "No, someone. It feels like every cell in my body is screaming." The Grand Duke and his men stand in the rain, with narration explaining that mana is naturally drawn to greater, stronger mana, making every fine hair stand on end. She leaps through the collapsed stone ruins, guided by the sensation of the magic saying, "I am here. Look this way." A text box narrates, "It's as if it's screaming out loud." A giant purple-ringed eye with gears in the background looms over her running figure, with text describing the presence as a violent, overwhelming mana. She gasps as a massive column of sparkling purple magic shoots into the stormy sky from the collapsed ruins. It hurts. Xion floats in a brilliant white void filled with sparkles, thinking, "It hurts. My whole body hurts so much. So this is how much it hurts to burn to death." Looking at his undamaged, glowing right hand, Xion wonders if it burned completely without leaving bone dust, and wonders if Chamyuka is safe. Xion stands in a vast, empty, sunlit room, thinking, "He tried so hard to stop me. I feel a little sorry. I hope he was rescued safely." Xion stands with his head bowed in a brightly lit room, reflecting on his actions with deep remorse, thinking, "I am sorry. I thought I could save you if I did that, Lord Chamuka. I never expected this to happen. No, honestly, I might have hoped for it a little, but at the time I truly thought it was for the best." A close-up of Xion shows him gritting his teeth in frustration and sadness, continuing to think, "You must be disappointed that I boldly acted like I had a plan when I actually had nothing, but I truly didn't know. But just how far are you?" Before a voice interrupts his thoughts, asking, "Just how long are you going to sleep?" A pale hand reaches out and gently pokes the forehead of the sleeping golden-haired child, trying to wake him up. In a brilliant space of light, Xion points a finger forward as a young golden-haired boy falls backward, bathed in a shimmering rainbow prism of light. The young golden-haired boy gasps with wide purple eyes as he falls backward into a deep pitch-black void. Letitia suddenly wakes up with a gasp, sitting up in a large, comfortable bed with bandages on his cheeks. He is surprised to find a silver-haired Xion sleeping soundly beside him, still tightly clutching his bandaged hand. Letitia stares blankly with wide, brilliant purple eyes, blinking in confusion as he tries to process his surroundings. Letitia looks down at the sleeping, bandaged Xion next to him, utterly bewildered as to why the boy is there. As the head maid enters the grand bedchamber, Letitia clutches his chest and coughs violently, gasping, What is going on? Cough, 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 cough." The head maid quickly offers a glass of water, saying, "Here is some water, drink up." Letitia reaches out with a shaky, bandaged hand, weakly whispering, "Think," as he continues to cough. Letitia looks up with wide, glittering purple eyes as he drinks, and the head maid politely says, "Congratulations on awakening your mana, Your Highness." Against a backdrop of delicate pink roses and ribbons, the elegant head maid stands inside the sunlit room, smiling warmly and reassuringly at the young prince. Letitia gasps, as his gaze drifts toward the massive arched window where warm, bright sunlight pours into the beautifully decorated room. The head maid keeps her eyes fixed on Letitia, her gentle smile unchanging as she waits for him to gather his thoughts. Letitia looks down at his hand, touching his chest as he asks in disbelief, "So you survived?" Letitia looks down with a shadowed gaze, holding his hand close to his chest as he quietly whispers, "Yes, thank goodness." The head maid explains gently, "You just awakened your mana, so you must be feeling quite uncomfortable. But this is a natural process of your body rebuilding itself to adapt to the mana. You don't need to worry too much." Only for Letitia to suddenly bow his head and cut her off, saying, "I'm sorry." Startled by his sudden apology, the head maid turns to him in surprise and asks, "Pardon?" While Letitia remains seated in bed, looking down with heavy guilt. Letitia tightly clenches his fist, wrinkling the ornate golden bedsheet in frustration and self-reproach. Letitia confesses in a quiet, trembling voice, "I was the one who suggested we go into the tower." Letitia explains his past actions, thinking, "I heard the stories about Lord Tan and I didn't think we could just leave him like that. It was presumptuous of me. Yes, it was presumptuous, but I was the one who said we should get the coffin. Chamuka was reluctant to do it." Letitia looks down in utter agony, tears welling up in his eyes as he thinks, "Because of me? Just why?" Looking at his own hands in the dim light of the room, Letitia questions himself bitterly, wondering, "Why? Then why couldn't I do it back then?" Letitia's mind races with dark, self-deprecating thoughts as he wonders, was I not desperate enough to awaken? Was it a matter of my willpower? Tormented by the painful memories of his past, Letitia blames himself, thinking maybe it was because I didn't face a life or death crisis, because my family protected me. I could have done it. I could have saved everyone. He then declares aloud, I was the one who put Chimuka in danger. I'll take whatever punishment. The head maid raises her hand in surprise and interrupts Letitia's self-punishing rant, asking, wait, I'm sorry, but what are you talking about? The head maid explains the situation to the bewildered prince, saying, we were able to rescue Chimuka all thanks to you, your highness. The fire was quickly put out thanks to the rain you summoned. She reassures him, saying, if you're saying this because of Chimuka's injuries, his wounds are fine. The doctor said he would make a full recovery with no lasting side effects. Letitia looks down with a sorrowful expression, still filled with guilt as he mutters, he wouldn't have gotten hurt in the first place if it weren't for me. The head maid sweats slightly at Letitia's persistent stubbornness and self-blame, feeling a bit helpless. The head maid speaks up again, saying, your highness, I wasn't the one who brought the eldest young master here. Letitia blinks in surprise as the head maid adds, what I mean is, the head maid explains, even though the doctor said he needed absolute rest, the young master stubbornly left his room and came down the stairs with his injured leg to find you. Letitia gasps in sheer shock, asking, what? Why? To which the head maid responds, only the young master knows the reason, but he's been checking on your condition every day and staying by your side. The head maid looks at Letitia with a soft, understanding gaze, saying, and even though you say this is your fault, your highness? In a flashback, Xian states firmly, it is my fault. Xian stands with his head bowed before the Grand Duke, who sits in an armchair, while the commander and the head maid stand in the background, listening to his explanation. The Grand Duke, looking deeply serious and intimidating, questions Xian, saying, so you're saying it was your idea to sneak into the West Tower to steal Tan's coffin? Xian does not back down, looking down slightly as he firmly replies, that's right. Xian continues to take all the blame, saying, I dragged the prince into the tower on my own accord, and this happened. It is my mistake. Hearing this, the Grand Duke's sharp golden eyes focus on him as he asks, did you know that the prince is a mage? Xian admits honestly, I did not. He didn't seem too sure of it himself, but Xian reveals the truth of Letitia's bravery, saying perhaps he thought there was no other way out because of my injuries in the explosion, but the prince walked into the fire of his own volition. The head maid and the commander both gasp in shock. The Grand Duke turns his attention to the head maid, calling, head maid. She quickly responds, ah, yes, it is a viable method. However, forcefully awakening through an opposing element is quite a violent approach. The Grand Duke closes his eyes, his expression heavy with grim realization as he remarks, he must have felt the burning pain in its entirety. Xian sits silently on his bed in the dark room, his head bowed, as a heavy silence fills the space between him and his father. The Grand Duke looks at his son and sighs softly, telling him, understood, rest until your body is fully healed. The head maid smiles warmly at Letitia, telling him, His Excellency doesn't know your side of the story yet, and even though I've realized that your accounts differ, I will pretend I didn't hear what you just told me. She stands watching Letitia as he sits quietly on the edge of the large chair, his head bowed in deep thought. Letitia looks down with a soft, gentle smile, his eyes shining as the head maid whispers, you saved his life. Letitia turns his gaze back to Xian, who is sleeping peacefully beside him, breathing softly as he continues his recovery. Letitia looks down at his hand, realizing it feels completely numb as Xian continues to hold it tightly. Looking at the bandaged hand holding his own, Letitia wonders in confusion, why is he holding it so tightly? He's hurt and can't even move anyway. Letitia remembers the sensation of his dream, where a hand desperately reached out to clutch another sleeve in a dark void filled with sparkling lights. As a glowing trail of light arches above him, Letitia continues to reflect on the deep, inexplicable connection between them. Glowing blue text boxes narrate his lingering thoughts. Because I was a handful of ashes in my dream, fluttering lightly with no hands and no feet? In his mind's eye, Letitia envisions himself leaning desperately against Xian, holding him tightly in a void of pure light and shadow. Seated in his bed with bandages on his cheeks, Letitia looks down, quiet and lost in his own complicated thoughts. Letitia turns to the head maid and asks, by the way, Hilda, how exactly were we rescued that day? To which Hilda replies, it makes sense that you don't remember much, Your Highness. Hilda recounts the rescue in a flashback, explaining, By the time the knights and I arrived, you had already opened a path. In the flashback, a young Letitia with glowing, brilliant purple eyes stands resolutely in the pouring rain, supporting a heavily injured, unconscious Xion. Xion completely loses consciousness, collapsing forward heavily into the rain. Xion's collapse causes a panic as voices shout through the stormy night. Your Highness, the eldest young master is injured. Escort him to the castle at once. Before Hilda narrates, you fainted right then and there. Looking shocked, Letitia stammeringly realizes, you fainted right then and there, even though I couldn't call for help. Hilda explains the mystery of how she found them, saying mana has a tendency to be drawn to stronger mana. Mages are also affected by this, so they feel a natural pull toward a mage stronger than them. Letitia looks up at her with wide eyes, completely amazed by this new revelation about mana. A humorous chibi panel depicts Hilda being buried up to her neck in a potato field by a stern Xion, as she sweat drops and says, and even buried me in a potato field once. A caption explains she awakened her mana during this ordeal, leaving Letitia to sweat drop and ask, excuse me? Returning to the present, Hilda stands before Letitia in the grand, dimly lit hallway and explains, that was how I managed to find you, Your Highness. Letitia listens in surprise as Hilda adds, I should have known when Lord Tan started seeking you out every night. I was quite oblivious. Letitia then asks, what about Lord Tan? Hilda explains, Lord Tan has a mana circuit as well, plus he can sense it much more sensitively than a person. A memory shows Letitia happily playing with the massive white wolf, Tan, as he realizes, so that's why Lord Guyan. Letitia inquires, now that you mention it, what happened to Lord Tan? I think I heard that both Lord Tan and his coffin were still in the tower. To which Hilda responds, Lord Tan. Hilda continues, well, the coffin was in the tower, just placed on a different floor. Letitia gasps in alarm. Then the coffin? Speech bubble reassures him, saying, don't worry, it didn't break because there were several layers of protection magic on it. Beside him, a groaning voice mutters, it's a bit of a stretch to say it's safe, as Xion slowly starts to stir and wake up in bed. Surprised to hear him speak, Letitia turns and asks, what do you mean? You just said the coffin didn't break. Letitia gasps, huh? In utter bewilderment as a cute, silver-haired child suddenly jumps onto his bed, barking, woof, against a backdrop of beautiful pink roses. Letitia is left completely speechless and shocked as the adorable, blue-eyed, silver-haired toddler happily hugs him with a bright smile.